Abdu, do you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. On behalf of the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, welcome to the 3 days webinar series on scaling of agricultural innovation through commercialization for sustainable food system transformation. My name is Mathieu Colombig. I'm the Managing Director of the AFLA-Safe Technology Transfer Commercialization Program at IITA. I'll be one of the co-chairs of this webinar series with Marcela. You just hear Marcela, and I think we are going to, she's the second co-chair of this for these 3 days. And Marcela is Program Officer Inclusive Market at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So let's put this event into context. After 4 years of commercialization of AFLA-Safe in Africa, we, supported by USAID and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we wanted to organize a workshop with private and public sector partners to review our progress and reflect on our experience and learning. However, considering the increasing interest of this topic and also the eagerness to learn more from others, in consultation with the foundation and other partners, we decided to expand the scope and to cover other agricultural innovation, sharing some similarities and related to their contribution to food safety and nutrition. So as we all know, Africa food systems are at an inflection point. Africa food and nutrition security has been worsened by COVID-19. And we know all the impact that we've seen in terms of supply chain disruption, movement restriction, and associated economic downturn. As we are working continuously to develop new agricultural innovation to address food safety and nutrition, while helping farmers adapt to climate change, we also need to accelerate their adoption. Indeed, to be of value, this innovation needs to be accessible, available, and affordable at a critical mass of smallholder farmers, and to make it very, to make the impact that we're expecting. We are also facing a risk of the obsolescence of some technologies that are yet to be used by the actors. I think it's a real waste of scarce resources available. Therefore, it's really imperative to identify and pave appropriate pathways for effective diffusion of scaling of innovations. So the objective of the webinar series is to exchange experience and lessons learned in commercializing the technologies to improve food safety and nutrition in smallholder farmers context. I think it's very important to mention this element. And I think this webinar also is a continuity. It fits in other initiatives that we've had over the last 3 or 4 years to improve the understanding and the practice of scaling up. Events such as the Scaling Up Conference organized by the Purdue University and African Development Bank in 2018. We have the Policy Forum on Scaling model of agricultural transformation held at the AGRF in 2019. And recently the scaling for food system transformation in the post-COVID-19 era held last year at the AGRF. I would like to use this opportunity to thank the community of practice on scaling up and our partners for this event, especially Purdue University, Harvest Plus, AGRA, the CGR Research Program on Agriculture for Nutrition and Health, A4NH, the McGill Center for the Convergence of Health and Economics, and the Global Open Data for agriculture and nutrition go down. I want to thank also all our great facilitators, speakers, rapporteurs who have accepted to play an active role in the webinar. So what are we, let's go to, when we look at the three webinars that we've planned for the next 3 days, you will see that they are really interconnected topic. Today we'll focus on the private sector engagement in commercialization innovations. The session will examine collaboration between the research and institution and private companies in commercializing agricultural technologies. Again, focusing on food safety and nutrition challenges. The topic of the second day is creating an enabling environment to commercialize innovations, and where we'll discuss really the ins and outs, as well as how to set up and manage enabling policies and institutions for successful commercialization of innovation. The last day, we'll discuss the implication of past experiences and lessons from the design of the future research, development, and commercialization initiative in the 21st century food system. So today we will start the opening session with a conversation and with the leadership of IITA and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This will be followed by a fireside chat with organizations promoting 3 types of technology that are being commercialized, that we'll discover them. And then we'll begin the first webinar. And I think the particularity of the first webinar is that it will include a breakout session where participants will discuss the challenge and opportunities in commercializing the 3 innovations. And we have the AFLA, we have emetic storage technologies and biofortified food. So few guidelines, and as we for this journey, we'll try to repeat it and as much as possible. And in terms of rules, apart from the speakers and facilitator, the camera and the mic of all other participants will be off and as a default settings. And please, when you are not talking, we'll advise to really mute your mic to facilitate the process and listing of the different participants. And kindly use the Q&A feature, and the facilitator and the support team will monitor the chat box and channel the questions to a panelist when appropriate. So remember, there's also a translation in French for French speakers, and you can click on the translation. You select, where if you are comfortable with French, there will be a translation for that. The webinar will be also be streaming in live, so I think those who are not able to register can just watch it. Okay, before we move with our guest, and I would like to do a quick poll and to know more about the audience today. And you'll see a link in the chat box that will direct you to a page. I think we want to know basically 2 things, and the country from which you are connecting from. I think that will give us also a little bit about the scope where people are coming from. And also the second one will be more about the category that best describe you. I think we want to know the kind of stakeholder that we have here. Research, is it from the research community, government, private sector, NGO, academia, donors, or financial institutions, and others. So yeah, so I think let's post it in the chat box. Please click on the link and try to respond to the question. We'll come back to the result and as we move ahead. Thank you very much for that, and thank you also for being here. For the opening session, we are lucky to have two important guests, and the first one is Mr. Thomas Kewe, is the Deputy Director, Inclusive Market on the Agricultural Development Team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the second one is Dr. Ken Dashil, Deputy Director of Partnership for Delivery at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. So I would like to invite Ken and Thomas to just activate their mic and camera for this interaction. Do we have, good afternoon, Ken, and good morning, Thomas.
Yeah, good afternoon, Abdu. Should I go ahead first or should Tom go?
Yeah, let's hear, is Tom on the line connected? Okay, probably let's start with Ken. Ken, I think since 2013, IITA has taken deliberate steps to integrate the delivery in its research for development activities. So can you tell us a little bit what informs such a strategic move and how is the scaling up? And especially the commercialization important for IITA as you are transitioning into the one CGR, which is a major change that we are seeing in the CG space. Over to you, Ken.
Yeah, thanks so much, Abdu. That's a very thoughtful question. And, IITA is 53 years old. But about 10 years ago, Mr. Bill Gates visited northern Nigeria. And he visited some farms there. And he saw a couple technologies that looked to be very promising. In fact, they're changing the lives of farmers. One was called AflaSafe, and one was called Najamax, and no need to go into the details. In that evening, he met with a gentleman named Dr. Sanginga, who was the Director General elect for IITA. And in their conversation, Mr. Gates told Dr. Sanginga, these technologies are wonderful, but I understand you can only impact maybe 100 or 200 farmers. He said, this is ridiculous. We need these technologies to go to millions of farmers, 10 million, 20 million farmers, to really impact the lives of African smallholder farmers, and in fact, all of society in Africa. And he said, Bill Gates told Dr. Sanginga, this is your challenge. I want you to come back to me in a few months and tell me how you're going to do that. And if you can explain to me how you're going to do it, maybe we can support you in that journey. Dr. Sanginga took up this challenge, and when he became the Director General, he proposed a plan to do that. And of course, not of course, but it ended up that plan was to partner with the private sector and to commercialize both of these technologies so that farmers could get these technologies all over Africa at affordable price, easily delivered to them, and sustainable, because once it's in the private sector and the private sector is making a profit, that technology becomes highly sustainable. So I want to thank the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation because it's actually 10 years ago that we started planning for this webinar, but it's taken us 10 years to get here today. But the great news is that almost all of this webinar series over the next 3 days is going to be very practical. It's going to be people talking about their experiences, their successes, their challenges, the opportunities, so that we can all learn from these practical experiences. And these practical experiences also involve into theory of how we should do things. And that is very, very important. Eventually, in about 2013, Abdu, as you said, the IITA set up what is called the Partnerships for Delivery Directorate. And I had the distinguished honor to lead that group for the last, 8 years. And we have learned a lot, and a lot of those learnings, we will all hear about them over the next 3 days. So Abdu, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to just make a few opening remarks. I'm looking forward to today and the next 2 days. Very interesting and impactful agenda that you have planned. And with that, I turn it back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken, for this statement. I think I'll come back to you, for another question. Good morning, Tom.
Morning. How are you?
I'm good, Tom. It's quite early for you, right?
Yeah, it's a little early, 5 in the morning, but we're all right.
Okay, so I think first, Tom, I remember the first time we met, it was in 2018 at the AGRF in Kigali. And I remember you told me, Abdul, the commercialization of AflaSafe is going to be a hard one, for you. But at the same time, you provide a lot of encouragement, and for the team to think out of the box and come up with some innovative way to move this forward. And thank you for the support, over these years. You knew that it's going to be hard, but it's hard. But I think we need to do something about it to make it available to a large group of actors. And the question for you, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has invested significantly in the development and dissemination of agricultural technology. What have you learned so far? And why is the scaling up is of importance for the foundation, in its activities?
Yeah, well, scaling up is definitely important for the foundation. I think Ken, as he mentioned, I believe the story he just told, because having conversations with Bill, scale and impact is something that's always top of mind, and not how do you reach 500, 1,000 farmers, but how can you reach millions of farmers to develop economies and move the global agenda forward. So innovation's at the very center of the foundation's approach in every domain in which we work, whether that's global health, global development, or U.S. education. And another thing we care deeply about at the foundation is putting impact first. I mean, the only way we're going to achieve impact is if our investments in innovation can be disseminated and diffused through sustainable mechanisms on the ground. So to drive impact through innovations, we need to work not only with the technology, but the policies and markets to ensure that these innovations can be delivered. I think a lesson we've all learned, and it's not just the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is that it's not enough to simply create the technology or to demonstrate its usefulness, but we need to actually work with market actors, and we can't be assuming that they're going to be coming into scale and into scale these technologies or to take them over. I think build it and they will come is something that all of us have had the lessons. And I think that's where, Abdu, you and I had that conversation around AflaSafe. Is we had the technology, we knew there was benefits to be had, but how do you actually deliver that? How do you actually scale it? It's a very challenging proposition, because these markets we work in, they're shallow, they're underdeveloped, there's widespread information asymmetries, lack of deep and innovative capital markets, there's high levels of systemic risk, poor contract enforcement, low margin business models, and a high cost to effectively reach small scale producers. And as small scale producers, those are the customers we care deeply about, but those are also the hardest customers to reach, because every dollar they have, every ounce of currency that they own is a very important vote, and it's a very important investment they make in any technology. So very risk adverse, very little discretionary spending. So it's a tough market to crack, and we all need to be working together and understanding, how do we actually continue to commercialize? How do we actually continue to take innovations and scale them in pathways, if it's appropriate to do so, through private sector actors or through government partners, or whatever the appropriate pathway may be. So 3 of the innovations that we're going to be examining closely over the next few days is AflaSafe, PICS, and biofortified crops. All of these have been a major part of the Ag Dev team's work for many years, and we learned a lot from our partners' efforts to scale these innovations. So as expected, with any efforts to scale, we had some lessons, we had some failures. And I think it's very important that we take this time to stop, reflect, look back, and try to understand what we can learn from these, learn from all 3 of these projects to actually help us create some lessons for the path forward. So we have no problems with making mistakes at the foundation. I think everybody does, especially when we're working in these hard environments. And I think, a mistake is fine as long as you learn from it, because then it becomes a lesson. So how can we actually reflect, look back at what these great teams have done over decades, if you will, and how do we actually learn from that to understand what things we could have done better? Because too often we're forward looking, we don't have time to reflect and look back at our work. I think there's an opportunity to celebrate the successes, but also step back and say, hey, what happens if we did this? What happens if we would have done this better? Hindsight's 2020, so let's use that 2020 vision to really understand and learn what it is we could be doing better. I think to help kick off that conversation, I mean, just a few questions that I have on the investments themselves, because they have been long-term in nature. And one of the things that I'm curious about is, could we have worked with private sector better? How do we engage with private sector, the companies that are ultimately going to be delivering these solutions to smallholder farmers? How do we bring them into the conversation earlier, even though they may not be interested in that technology at the time, or they may not have the bandwidth to take on or attend all of our questions? But if we look at an example would be in AfloSafe, bringing in UPL now, and their work on understanding, okay, how do we change the aggregate? How do we change the weight of this to allow for easier distribution, to make it more commercial, if you will, so that we can actually take this over further journeys? I think that's a very important conversation, and it would have been nice to have that in sooner rather than later. I think when we look at some other things like PICS bags, the go-to-market strategy about setting up demonstration villages and going in and demonstrating the bag, storing it, going back to that same village, it was very effective in demonstrating the value of the bags, getting trust from the farmers, but it was a very expensive go-to-market model. And when we look and say, okay, the distribution channel is going to be agro dealers and different networks, could we have done better by learning and innovating on how do you create and demand, how do you create customer demand through lower cost approaches that could be justifiable under a pure private sector play? Harvest Plus, was there opportunities to look at policy? Could we have spent more time understanding what we could do to put biofortification standards within national breeding programs? So lots of conversations, and I know we've had great partners we've been working with over the years, and the partners, the people involved are the ones who know this stuff. They're the ones who have the questions and have the ability to reflect. So I'm really excited to listen and learn from them on the experiences and what we can do to make our next endeavors in terms of scaling technologies even better. So thank you. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Tom, for this opening statement. I think I don't need to ask you the following question, because you provided already your expectation from this gathering, and I would like to go back. Probably let's look at the poll. Let's see where are we connecting from, and the kind of stakeholder do we have connected today. Tunde, could you please show us the result? And after that, I'll ask Ken, looking at this audience, what kind of expectation, from IITA perspective, what do you, expect from this intervention? So a lot of things. Can we see already in terms of locations? Okay, a lot from Nigeria, Kenya, US. We have Europe. I think West Africa is here. East Africa is here, is growing. So continue to really feed, this, the poll, and I will see, at the end, the kind of actors that we have around. So Ken, let me come back to you. I think what are your expectations, from this, 3 days webinar, And I think it will help also all of the participant speakers, and to make sure that we will help to achieve this objective, this expectation. Over to you, Ken.
My computer, okay, here it comes. Hello, oh, can you hear me, Abdul?
Yes,
Okay, thank you. I was having a bit of a technical problem. Thanks, Abdul. This is a great question, and I enjoyed seeing the results of your poll there, especially the large sector involvement from Nigeria, Kenya, Burkina Faso, and Benin. I was thinking about 3 different segments of our audience, and this isn't all the audience, but it will be a substantial portion. One sector of our audience is the private sector that is with us today, and I would anticipate and hope that throughout this webinar, they will become more open and more interested in the outscaling of new technologies. And I would encourage them on their own initiative to contact their local research organizations, their national research organization, their Ministry of Agriculture, and even international centers like IITA or other CGIAR centers to be inquisitive and find out what are the newest technologies and would somehow any of those fit into their business plan and start that conversation. Our colleagues who are in research organizations, I'm anticipating that this webinar will motivate them that if they don't already have a strong department in their research organization, to reach out and link with the private sector to somehow start that conversation on how can we take some of these good technologies and commercialize them. So I'm anticipating that that will happen. And of course, throughout the webinar over the next 3 days, you will be meeting people who have lived through these experiences, both from the private sector side and from the research side. And you can contact us and get more detailed information about how can I make that bold step to move forward in this area. And finally, I'm sure we will have people in the audience from the government sector, those policymakers, Ministry of Agriculture, etc. And for those, I will encourage you, again, to work on both sides, because the government works with private sector, and the government also works with the research institutions and the Ministry of Agriculture, which is doing the extension. And I would like to see governments play an active role in creating that enabling environment that will allow the success of commercial enterprises in moving forward with their enterprise and having profits, but that also means the farmers are getting the inputs or the other technologies that they require to be successful. So I expect that we're going to have impact. It's not, thank you very much, I listened, and I'm going to remember those wonderful things you talked about. But I think at the end of 3 days, we're going to have people that are motivated and ready to take action to move forward with commercializing new technologies for agriculture in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ken, for this. I think we hear you as we see the polls moving. We have a diversified, group of actors, and I think the research community is the biggest one here. We have the private sector well represented. We have government officials. We have NGOs. We have the academia, donors, financial institutions, and others. I think we have a mix, and I'm sure that with the great facilitator that we have, we'll try to achieve these objectives. So thank you, Ken and Tom, for this statement, and we'll move on to the next, the second part of the day. And I would like to introduce you, and I mentioned her briefly, and I would like to introduce you, Marcella McClatchy, as facilitator of the next section. Marcella is a program officer for inclusive market on the agricultural development team at the Gate Foundation. And here, Marcella developed investments and partnership with companies and non-profit to develop innovation and technology and business model that solve critical constraints for smallholder farmers in Africa and India. So I'm pleased to introduce you, Marcella. Marcella, over to you. You have the floor for the next session.
Thanks, Abdu. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. Do we have the other panelists for our fireside discussion as well? Rananjeet, Dieudonné, and Donald.
Yes, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Super. So we thought it would make sense to start off this discussion really at the beginning and hear from the folks that have been deeply involved in the development and commercialization of the 3 technologies that we wanted to focus this discussion on. So I'm pleased to introduce first Dr. Dieudonné Baributsa, who is the Associate Professor of Entomology at Purdue University, and also the team manager for the Purdue Improved Cowpea Storage or PICS bags. Dieudonné has 20 years of experience in international development, as well as a Master's of Science and PhD from Michigan State University. Next, we have Mr. Donald Mabinidze, who is the Regional Director of Harvest Plus. Donald has more than 23 years of experience in the agricultural sector in Africa, and has held various leadership positions in both the public and private sector. He was previously the Director of Commercialization at the African Agricultural Technology Foundation before joining Harvest Plus in 2018. And finally, we have Dr. Rananjit Bandyopadhyay. Dr. Rananjit, are you there as well?
Yes, I'm here. Right.
Hi, Dr. Rananjit.
Hi.
Rananjit is principal scientist at IITA, where he co-founded the Africa-wide AflaSafe initiative. He's been working on guiding the research, development, and commercialization of AflaSafe since 2003. And he holds a PhD in plant pathology from Haryana Agricultural University in India, with more than 40 years of agricultural research and development experience in Asia and Africa. So I just wanted to start by asking each of the three of you to tell us a little bit more about these technologies. Can you tell us a little bit about what problems they solve, how do they work, and just briefly, what is the commercialization approach that you took for each of these technologies? Perhaps Rananjit, we can start with you.
Right. So basically, AflaSafe addresses the issue of aflatoxin contamination in several staple crops, primarily corn and peanuts. About 25% of these crops are usually contaminated above the permissible limit, and that impacts almost 4.5 billion people worldwide, particularly in between 35 degrees north and 35 degrees south, in which most of sub-Saharan Africa actually falls. The impact of aflatoxin, it transcends the health, food security, and safety and trade sectors. And aflatoxin's impact is primarily seen on poor and the children. The health effects might include liver cancer, growth impairment, immune suppression, and even death. And because of aflatoxin's carcinogenicity, the compound is actually regulated in the market in parts per billion levels. And as a result, sometimes contaminated food cannot be marketed or cannot go into the food or feed sectors, and that results in withdrawal of the contaminated material from the markets, and as a result, food insecurity sets in, and the companies they undergo trade losses. As an example, the Partnership for Aflatoxin Control in Africa, which is an African Union-based organization, estimated that about Nigeria loses about $1.6 billion in cancer-related illnesses, particularly liver cancer-related illnesses, and about 40% of all liver cancer-related illnesses are actually caused by aflatoxin. How does AflaSafe actually works? So the technology was initially developed in the US by USDA ARS the principle of the technology is called competitive exclusion. We at IITA, we adapted and improved the technology in partnership with USDA ARS and several national partners. Now, the way the technology works is this. The fungus that produce aflatoxin, Aspergillus flavus, it has both toxin producers and non-toxin producers in nature. What we do is to mine the diversity of the fungus in the soil and in the crop and identify non-toxin producing strains of the fungus. And through a very careful selection process. And what we try to do is to actually modulate or change the fungal community in the soil but through which we increase the proportion of the non-toxin producers and increase the proportion of the, and decrease the proportion of the toxin producers. And as a result, the amount of aflatoxin actually goes down. So scientifically, it's a very valid and strong principle through which we the product is developed. These strains are then formulated into a product, and about 10 kg of the product per hectare is applied once before the crop flowers, and that reduces the aflatoxin contamination by in between 80 and 100% compared to untreated fields. Additionally, the product also has a carryover effect from the field to the store, and not only that, from one season to another season. In other words, this is a very strong technology, and we have conducted thousands and thousands of on-farm trials and shown the effectiveness of the product. Marcela, what was the third question?
Can you just briefly explain, I think we'll get into this in a bit more detail, but could you briefly explain how you approach commercialization for AflaSafe?
Right. So before talking about the commercialization approach, let's talk about the constraints to adoption. And Tom actually beautifully mentioned those. And I don't need to go into the details of that. So in our approach has been, we can actually put it into three boxes. First of all is the baseline. And the baseline is development of the product itself, the highly effective product itself, and then followed by registration of the product. And I think the registration of the product was crucial because usually registration of biopesticides is difficult, but together with the private sector and the public sector, we could actually get the registration process sorted out by involving the regulators into the research process very early on. And therefore, the registration was usually done within a year of fighting for registration itself. And so after registration, we then went through a whole set of evidence generation in order to prepare for commercialization. For example, we had to demonstrate demand of the product for the product. And for that, we initially looked at the low-hanging fruit, and the low-hanging fruit in our case was the poultry market. And the smallholder farmers began to produce AflaSafe treated grains for the poultry market, and the poultry industry being very highly affected, they started actually paying a premium for AflaSafe treated product, and that's how the initial demand was actually created. Once the demand was created, we very quickly realized that without mass manufacturing capacity, the technology will not go forward. And that's where the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation came in and helped us to actually set up a demonstration scale manufacturing plant. And that made a complete difference in terms of how the technology actually was viewed. Through the demonstration scale technology, demonstration scale manufacturing plant, we could produce sufficient quantity of AflaSafe that could treat large hectareage, and through an incentivization scheme, again funded partially by the Gates Foundation and other donors to the AgResults project, we could actually show the marketability of the product and the profitability of the product to the extent that through this scheme, it was demonstrated that the aggregators and the farmers could actually gain about 10% premium in the market from AflaSafe treated grain itself. Thirdly, the private industry also began their own independent evaluation of the product. And so all these came together, and it was clear that AflaSafe could be produced locally without any problem. There is a market, but that market had to be pursued really strongly, and as Tom actually mentioned. So based on that, we then came to the point that in order for the technology to be scaled up, it was essential that the private sector is involved. And again, USAID and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation funded the AfriSafe Technology Transfer and Commercialization Project. And this particular project followed a 5-step commercialization process. And the 5 steps are: first, of course, develop the products; second, register the products; third, develop a commercialization strategy specific for each country that guided the whole commercialization process. And commercialization strategy was then presented to investors forum, and then we shortlisted investors for preparing business plans, and we held the shortlisted companies to prepare the business plan. We evaluated that to a committee, and then one company was selected for manufacturing and distribution in each country, followed by the ATTC project helping the private investors to set up the manufacturing plant and provide technical assistance, because this is a new kind of a product and it needed a lot of technical and microbiological support. And finally, all the experiences that we gained from this process was refined, adapted, and improved for the next particular step for other countries. So that has been more or less the process, and the process was embedded in other efforts in awareness, advocacy, and institutional support. And at this point of time, I would like to get the infographics up. Tunde, if you can actually get the infographics up, that will be very helpful. Hello?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so this process, the AfriSafe development work is continuing in 21 countries. There have been 14 products that have been developed for 10 countries. And the companies who have been licensed, they have invested more than $5 million to commercialize the products. They have created 4 factories, and 8 companies are manufacturing and distributing the product in the 10 countries. And then AfriSafe is now available commercially in 9 countries through 92 different distribution points. And through this, until now, about 3,600 tons of AfriSafe has been used by farmers to treat 360,000 hectares, and through which about 720,000 tons of crops have been produced. So this is in brief the status where we are in terms of the commercialization process. Over to you, Marcella.
Thanks, Ranjit. That was really comprehensive, and I think we have a lot of pieces of this that we can dive into throughout the next 3 days to learn more about how these different steps fit together and evolved over time. Next, I want to go to Dieudonné to talk a little bit about the PICS bags. And Dieudonné, the same questions, 3 questions to you. Can you talk a little bit about the PICS technology? What is it solving for? How does it work? And can you discuss briefly the commercialization approach that the team took for PICS?
Yeah, thank you, Marcella. So after we do harvest, we apply AfriSafe, we get into the issues of post-harvest. So as we know, you can see on the left here, if you don't protect your grain at harvest, then you get, the grain is infested by different insects. So depending on the crop, maize, you get different kind of insect, and these are cowpeas. So, and what we have done at Purdue, this was developed in the early 80s. A professor in the Department of Entomology, Larry Murdoch, has started working on a solution for preserving grain with farmers in northern Cameroon. So that's when they came up with these hermetic bags, or called Purdue Improved Crop Storage. So we have evolved from cowpea. Now the bags is used for storing different type of crops. including maize and all kinds of crops. So, and when you store your cowpeas or maize into this bag, the maize is preserved, as you can see here on this picture below the bag. So in terms of commercialization, so we took a two-pronged approach. So on one hand, we were training farmers on how to use the bag. That's what Tom mentioned about, training, farmers in villages, doing demonstration, proving that the technology works for them or works in preserving these grains. And as Tom mentioned, this was really a very tedious and very expensive process, but I think it really has paid off. So, and then when you look at the private sector side, so we had one end was really creating the market, creating the demand, because when you go to the private sector, the first question they ask is, where is the market and how big is the market? So and here I think we need to, as we think about commercialization, we need to focus on a target market. So there are two things. There is an available market and there is also the target market. So thinking about what is your target market? What are those customers that you can be able to reach is really, really important. So thinking about the size, because that becomes critical when you're trying to get the private sector involved. So in what we did for the private sector, we provided, at first it was, we went and found, private sector who were interested, but later on we realized that it was really important to get some kind of IP on the technology because we didn't have IP at the beginning, and also have some kind of agreements or licensing agreement with those manufacturers. That really helped us to show us who are the manufacturers who were committed in terms of promoting the technology, and also who will be able to produce a quality product, because you don't want to compromise the quality on the market. Otherwise, you'll have issues with your customers. So as you can see here, these are the sales growth from when we started in 2007 until 2020. So as you can see, the first 7 years, I mean, we were really excited. When we started, we were really excited. We were, saying that the growths are really excellent. We went from 5,000 bags in 2000, 5,000 bags in 2007 to somewhere around, I think, 2.5 million bags in 2014. We were excited, saying, oh, we are really making great progress. And I think that's where when you look at this, you feel the cost of delivering the product to smallholder farmers was really high. But when you look at the rest, from 2014 to 2020, it's really an exponential growth. And I think to some extent, there is that need for subsidizing the market development at the beginning of the product, because from there, if it's really a product that is needed by the market, you'll see an exponential growth. So we've really grown the market. And now I think, at the beginning, I would say in the first 7 years, the process was expensive because us as Purdue and our partners, we were learning how to do this training better. At the same time, this really helped to convince the private sector. Without a market, it was really difficult. When we started in West Africa, it was tough to convince the private sector to buy into this process. But after we had proven that there was an existing market in West Africa, it was really much easier now to convince private sector in other regions. So, and that growth from 2014 to 2020 was due by two things. One, we expanded the use of the bags from cowpea to other crops. The second thing also, we moved the product from West Africa to other regions of the world. So, and as I mentioned again, as we were moving the product, because we had already proven in West Africa that the product was effective and farmers needed the product, it was much easier for us to convince other private sector in other regions of the world. So I think I'll probably stop there, and then if there are more questions, we can continue the discussion.
Thank you, Judine. Yeah, we will come back for some more questions and discussion on each of these technologies. But finally, I wanted to make sure we had time for Donald to tell us a little bit about Harvest Plus. So Donald, over to you for the same three questions. Tell us about Harvest Plus. What issue is it solving for, and how does the technology work? And can you give us a broad overview of the commercialization approach for Harvest Plus?
Thank you very much, Marcella. I would just like to say good evening to everyone who's listening and all around the world. So for us in Harvest Plus, it's been quite an exciting journey. We continue to learn, perfect our efforts as we go along. So, from the beginning, nutrition and malnutrition mitigation has been at the center of our journey. Our primary focus has been and continues to be how we can contribute significantly to reducing the levels of malnutrition all over the world. And at the beginning, we really saw agriculture as a very viable conduit making this happen, because we knew that agriculture can help to impart sustainability into the whole system. And it is the kind of activity that most of our target communities are engaged in. We knew that dietary diversity has always been and continues to be acknowledged as one of the ways in which agriculture could help to contribute to malnutrition. However, we also knew that the most vulnerable and poor communities and poor households that are affected by this problem of malnutrition did not afford, a diverse diet which consists of animal source fruits and vegetables and so on and so forth. So, we had to think of another innovation. What other innovation can we come up with that could leverage agriculture as a conduit of mitigating micronutrient malnutrition? We thought of two ways. One way was.
Donald, I think you just went back on mute.
Sorry about that. I think someone might have muted me. I was just saying that there were two ways that we thought about, how we could leverage on agriculture to combat micronutrient malnutrition. One of the most obvious ways was, can we make this diverse diets affordable? I think this had been tried and continues to be, people continue to try and increase productivity and so on, but it continues to be a challenge, and a lot of populations are finding it difficult.
Sorry, Donald, I'm just going to interrupt you again because we're having a little bit of trouble hearing you. Maybe just to start, could you try to maybe go off video and see if that improves the sound quality, but you're cutting out a little bit.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better so far. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I hope it stays stable. So I was just saying that making a diverse diet affordable was one of the ways that we thought that, it had been tried, people to try it up to now. And so we thought, what can we do to make the food that are already affordable and accessible to most people? How can we make them more nutritious? And hence, the concept of biofortification was born. And in essence, biofortification means the breeding of high nutrient density staples into your everyday staples. And here we're talking of staples such as your rice, your cassava, your maize, your beans, the ordinary staples that are consumed by most people around the world on a daily basis. And what we wanted to do is to make sure that we can incorporate those nutrients that are causing this big problem of malnutrition, micronutrient malnutrition. And these nutrients happen to be iron, zinc, and vitamin A. And through these staples, which are widely consumed, then makes it affordable for increased intake of these nutrients. But we also realized that nutrition is left behind. So through biofortification, we wanted to have a process where we could bring back to the core issue of nutrition. So working with our various partners, this has been made possible. And as we speak today, we have supported the release of more than 200 varieties of 12 biofortified crops in 30 countries around the world. So from the beginning, we knew that we had to get the innovation to as many people as possible. We just didn't want to develop this variety. We had to do something to make sure that we can contribute towards reducing this problem. And the numbers say that about 2 billion people around the world are suffering from micronutrient malnutrition. And in the latest SOF report that was published last year, it alludes to 3 billion people actually not being able to afford a healthy, nutritious diet. And this was even before COVID, before the COVID-19 pandemic. So you can think about it now. Now it's probably higher than that, maybe even 4 billion or more. We are yet to see what the latest statistics will show. So our ambition from the start was to reach at least half of those 2 billion people. That is 1 billion people. And for those 1 billion people, we wanted them to benefit from this innovation by 2030. And so we quickly realized that for this to become a reality, we needed to engage all sorts of stakeholders, both public and private sector players, for it to go, for the innovation to go viral. And we started to engage the whole ecosystem of partners, and we realized that we had to take a systems approach, because working along the food value chain of the crops in question would make sure that we strengthen all the links within the whole chain if this innovation was going to scale up in a sustainable manner. We have made quite some progress to this end. At the end of 2019, actually, 8.5 million households were estimated to be growing biofortified crops, and 42.6 million people were actually benefiting from these biofortified crops. Maybe let me talk a little bit more about our engagement with the private sector. So it is a major piece of how we can make biofortification go viral. So we engage private sector because this is planting material, engage them through the seed value chain. And we made sure that they could have access to planting material. We made sure that they could be licensed so that they could start growing and start distributing planting material. But we also realized that we needed to help them along the whole process to make sure that they're successful in doing so. There's always some barriers to entry when you come up with a new innovation, new product, and we needed to see how we can lower those entry barriers as Harvest Plus to help these private sector partners to be successful if they take the innovation to scale. And I think we have been quite successful, as we had from the numbers that I just spoke about. We continue to work through it, because some of the crops actually that I talked about are not, they may not be suitable for private sector engagement. That's why we need public sector. We continue to work with both sectors and to scale up. Thank you. And for now, I'll stop there. And if there are any questions, I'll be.
Thanks, Donald. I think folks are still having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. So I will just go through one more round of questions before we end the fireside chat, but would request if you could maybe work on your audio in the background so folks can hear you for this last piece. But before we wrap up the fireside, I wanted to just turn it back to the three participants. I think that this was a great introduction to these technologies. And as we get into the details, I think we're going to see that there's a lot of really rich lessons about how these technologies commercialized and got to scale, and what worked well and didn't well along the way. But I wanted to just ask, in the last couple of minutes, if each panelist could just say briefly, what do you think is the biggest lesson, or the biggest way that the thinking around delivery and commercialization for your innovation evolved over the course of the project? I would request just each panelist to spend 1 minute answering this question. and then we'll wrap up the session and we can go into more detail during the breakouts. So perhaps we can start with Judene.
Yeah, thank you, Marcela, for that interesting question. So I would say on our side as PICS, things evolved. I would say on the commercialization side, first we were giving the bugs for, without any license, which were creating some issues of quality control and so on. So it was really important to have some type of license on the product IP. So IP was really critical in commercializing the bug. I would say also, we were, at the beginning, we were giving bugs on consignment. So basically we will try to buy the bugs and give them to the private sector to be able to, sell and so on. Over time, it was really hard to know who was serious and who was not serious in terms of commercializing the product. So I think, as we were evolving, so we were changing our strategy as how we work with the private sector. So being able also to continue to adapt the product or do more research to understand our customers who are farmers. So that really helped a lot in terms of expanding our market. So being able to expand the use of the bag. So what I'm trying to say there is really understanding or developing more value proposition for your product will help to expand your market, which also will help to grow the business for the private sector. Because the private sector cares about it's money. If they don't make money, it will be really hard to engage the private sector or sustainably engage them. So thinking about the market, the size of the market, and how you engage them on a sustainable way is really critical. As you saw there, it's really expensive at the beginning, to grow that market, but I think over time it pays off. So, I mean, we need to really stick into doing what we do and then adapt and learn and adapt. Otherwise, if there is no learning and adaptation, it's just going to be hard to make progress.
Great, thanks, Judene. There's also some really rich questions in the chat around specific technologies. So I would just encourage these more detailed discussions around specific technologies to come through during the breakout sessions as well, because I think folks are asking some great questions. Rananjeet, next over to you for just one more minute. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of what are some of the key lessons that you learned along the way, or just one key lesson that you learned along the way, and how that's changed your thinking around delivery of agricultural technologies and innovations?
So on the technology side, we were initially developing national products, one product each for each country, and we began to realize that unless the companies have an expanded market, it's going to be difficult they can find it easier to commercialize if they have a larger market, and therefore we are now gradually going into regional products through which the companies can actually manufacture for multiple countries. We have also tried to improve the manufacturing process in the sense that initially we were using a wet manufacturing process and we went into a dry manufacturing process, and then in terms of helping the private sector producing the material in a cheaper manner, we again began to actually provide them with dry spores for proper quality control, and so that they can reduce their the cost and the capital outlay in their factories itself. The other thing is that usually one country has one manufacturing plant. Now we have begun to realize that one country can actually have multiple countries can be served through one country itself. The other aspect is providing policy support and awareness support, particularly and advocacy too, And we are gradually seeing that happen, making a difference in Kenya, where now the government is actually taking, and not only Kenya, but also in Nigeria, where the government is also playing a key role in supporting the product for farmers to, and helping the farmers to actually access the product. But the major challenge that remains is to actually have the value proposition go through the entire value chain. And that is something that we are actually working on. And we hope that over a period of time, that would be actually resolved. We will have a better handle on it. Okay. Over to you.
Thank you, Ranajit. So Donald, we'll conclude with you, hoping your audio is a little bit better now, but can you tell us in just the last minute that we have here, at least one lesson that you've learned about commercialization for biofortified crops, and how your thinking around delivery and commercialization has evolved throughout the team's work on this project?
Thank you, Marcella. I hope you can hear me now. Is it clearer?
So far, so good.
Okay. I'm having some network issues here. Apologies. Yeah, so on top of what my colleagues have actually outlined already, actually also learned the same kind of lessons. But for us, one of the biggest lessons that we have learned is that we need to approach scale. We need to use a systems approach when we scale. We ensured that we took at the role of addressing the whole system at the system level barriers which were impeding the rapid scale up of our private sector partners along the whole value chain. And so you'll be hearing from some of our partners that we've worked with, both in this plenary during the breakout session. We quickly realized that, you know what, we needed to look at not only at the innovation end of the equation, we needed to look at the other pieces of value chain. In our case, we're dealing with seed production, a seed technology that is planting materials. We need to make sure that the seed is available. We need to make sure that the farmers understand how to use it, new ways of preparing the food that is made from the biofortified crops. And we knew that farmers normally produce surplus. They needed to have an outlet. So we work with off-takers and food processors so that we can also target non-farming households. But as we were doing that, we learned the difficult way that we had to work with policy, make sure that there is an enabling policy environment from the public sector side that will grease the whole chain, make sure that the links within the chain are strong enough. We also had to work with other public sector institutions for things such as standard, things such as aflatoxin and aflasafe that my colleagues were talking about. Those are things that we quickly learned that we had to get involved and incorporate intervention for. So working in a system, following a systems approach, and working to do all the clicks in the chain was one of the major things that we learned from our experience scaling up biofortification. There's lots more. I know we don't have time. I would be happy to share some of our other learnings in the breakout session. Over to you.
Thank you, Donald. And thanks to all three of our panelists this morning. I think you all did a great job of setting the stage for what should hopefully be a richer and deeper discussion over the next few days. With that, I'd like to turn it back over to Abdu for our next session.
Thank you, Marcella, and thank you, Ranajit, Donald, and Jedone for this good insight. I can see there are a lot of questions in the chat box. We want to make sure that we will compile them, and we'll increase the time depending the way the question are addressed during the next session. We can increase a little bit the time of the breakout session to ensure that the different speakers can address them. We'll ensure that we push all these questions during the breakout session. Thank you very much. And I think we'll transition to the main session. And I'm pleased. We are very happy to have our next facilitator, Ms. Aggie Conde, who is the Vice President, Program Innovation and Delivery at the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. At AGRA, Aggie leads a special team of scientists and generalists across 11 African countries in West, East, West, and Southern Africa, and she is responsible for the strategy role of portfolio design and development, monitoring and implementation, and to achieve agricultural transformation by 2030. I think Aggie has more than 50 years of experience from the public and the private sector. I think that's very important. They would like to learn to bring these areas, how we can, the discussion around these two areas. And she served also in different boards, across the continent. And Aggie is social scientist, and she holds an MBA from the University of Liverpool. And also, she's pioneering student of the Global CEO program. Aggie, thank you very much for joining us, and I'm giving you the floor for the next session. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Abdul. I hope I'm audible enough.
Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you.
Excellent. Thank you for setting the scene. I think that you and Marcella have really set the bar very high, but I promise the audience that we've got another set of fire panelists that will be coming to elevate the conversation even higher. So to our over 220 members that are online, Ola, Saubona, Habari, Moni, Sanu, Bonjour, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are joining us from. Allow me to thank our partners and the teams that have been working very, very hard to put this very complex and collaborative series of webinars together. I guess we must all agree that there's nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come. And I think the conversations we're having right now in terms of scaling private or engaging private sector in commercializing agriculture innovations to improve food safety and nutrition is very timely, but equally is urgently required for the over 33 million smallholder farmers that we have in sub-Saharan Africa, but also the multiple smallholder households that are continuously consuming these very unsafe products and ending up increasing our cost of health, cost of public sector management, and all that goes with economic transformation. To take us through the session this afternoon, I would like to first and foremost welcome, but sorry, before I do that, I would like to ask us to remember that we've got about 3 hashtags this afternoon. Please feel free to share some of the key takeaways that you're getting from these sessions using the hashtag scaling ag innovations, hashtag food systems. Those are available for any of the key comments that you will be hearing. One of which from myself was that I had with the first speaker was that 40% of liver cancer is caused by aflatoxins. And I will be tweeting that later this evening and hashtagging it. So please, we cannot be talking to ourselves. I encourage us to share these messages widely, because the more people know about these issues, the more we influence behavior change and the more we encourage adoption of these technologies. So without further ado, join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Coley Lawrence, who's the President Emeritus and Founder, Management Systems International. He will be walking us through his talk for about 30 minutes, but allow me to really share his quick profile to some of you that might not know him, but I'm sure most people on this call already know Dr. Lawrence very well. But he's the founder and President Emeritus of Management Systems International and a specialist in large system change. He currently serves as the chair of the Governing Council of the Society for International Development, is the board chair of World Learning and trustee of Elma Philanthropies, and is also an author of the widely used methodologies for managing policy change, scaling innovation, and entrepreneurship development. He is an elected fellow and board member of the US National Academy of Public Administration and a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. Mr. Coley is founder and curator of the Global Community of Practice on Scaling Development Outcomes. He's a graduate of Columbia University, Princeton University, and Cranford School of Management. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Lawrence Coley to take us through his keynote speech. Over to you, Larry.
Aggie, I'm only disappointed that my parents were not alive to hear that lovely introduction. Thank you so much. And thanks to IITA for inviting me to give a few remarks about scaling. For those of you who've watched this issue of scaling, it was a very lonely activity a couple of decades ago when I started, and now it's a very popular subject. But I'm afraid we still have sometimes more smoke than light on this, and I'm going to try to cut through about 20 years of research on this in practice and give you in 20 or 25 minutes some of the high points that I think are especially relevant to this question of scaling through commercial channels, agricultural innovations that really aim at the poor and that incorporate issues like food safety, health, and food security. And let me start with just a couple of realities. These are not happy realities, but they're realities. One is that I found in my own research that only about 1 out of every 20 innovations, and I mean proven innovations, ever successfully scales. Think about that. That means that 19 out of 20 do not. You might ask yourself, well, why? I mean, I'm talking about proven technologies and still they don't scale. I'm going to try to unwind for you why that's so. Second reality is the things that do scale usually take on average about 15 years. For most donors, that's a very long time. Even for investors, that's a long time. So how can we shorten the time, and what can we do to take into account the fact that the time, no matter what, is probably going to be longer than we wish? And third, why has agriculture been so slow to focus on this issue of scaling? If you look at the health field, for example, they focus very early on the issue of scale. Agriculture, we've been slower, and I think the reasons are basically two. The first is that we fell in love with technology, and we forgot about all of the other things that you've been hearing from speakers that are so important for taking those technologies to scale. And the second thing is there's a suspicion between the public sector and the private sector in the agricultural sector. Even though we need each other, we don't quite trust each other. And so the kind of collaboration that's necessary to take innovation to scale has been slower and more infrequent than it should be. So I'm going to try to suggest some lessons, not only to explain these problems, but to find ways to resolve some of those problems. The one thing that I can tell you is that it is getting better. Abdu discussed earlier the conference at Purdue in 2018. In my mind, that was an inflection point. That was a point at which many people came together with a common voice around scaling. And since then, there have been a number of initiatives within the CGIAR system, including this conversation, within AGRF, within a series of conferences, the World Food Prize. All of a sudden, the issue of scaling is getting the attention I think it deserves, and it's none too soon. So I'm going to share with you now my slides. I'm going to run through these a little quickly, but if I'm going too quickly, put a word in the chat box and I'll slow down. All right, here we go. All right, let me see what I can do with this to get, I see. Hold on, don't go anywhere. Oops. All right. Who's going to help me make this a?
Yeah, we can see your screen. We can see your screen.
But can you see the
Just
first
click
slide
on the
there?
presentation mode.
How do I make this so that you can?
Yeah, click on that.
Full size. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. So I want you to look at this picture. And I have a feeling at least some of you will see a candle when you look at this picture. Maybe some of you see two faces looking at each other. I'm betting that those of you who see the candle don't see the two faces, and those who see the two faces probably don't see the candle. I'll give you a hint. The candle is in white and the two faces are in blue, looking at each other. Why am I showing you this? I'm showing you this because I want to make the point that our perception really influences our reality. And once you see it one way, it's very difficult to see it another way. Now let me take this to our world. So look at this picture. And I bet most of you are focusing on the blue bars on the left-hand side. And if you are, maybe you're thinking this is a graph that shows agricultural production, or maybe it shows incomes, or it shows people in poverty, or it shows malnourishment or the reduction of malnourishment. And you say, okay, the top bar is the best. We're doing the best. The bottom bar, we're not doing so well. Every time a bar moves from left to right, probably you say, we're doing better. But I want you to think about it another way. Think that's the candle, the blue bars. Let's call that the project mentality. I want you to focus not on the blue bars, but on the white space to the right of the blue bars. Everything that's not being covered by a blue bar. That's the need that's not being met. And if we think like scaling people, not like project people, we don't focus on the blue, we focus on that white space. And what can we do to close that white space? And if we're focused on the white space, all of these bars are doing badly, all of them. And that's the situation with trying to deal with agricultural production and health and food security and food safety in Africa and around the world. We have much too much white space. And the question is, what can we do to close it? Not congratulate ourselves on the blue bars, but worry about how to fill that white space. And if you think about that, businesses and governments do this naturally. Businesses, because they're trying to get to what the private sector calls the addressable market. They want to sell their product to as many people as possible. So that takes them to scale, or at least an effort to scale. Governments have their populations to serve, and they're trying their best to reach as many people as possible. That means for them too, scale is part of their DNA. So is sustainability. But now let me complicate it a little. Now bring in a donor and implementing partners, and sometimes even more than that. When that happens, it gets more and more complicated. And you might ask yourself, well, what's going on here? What happened between the first graphic and the second graphic? And the answer I want to suggest to you is incentives. When donors are working with implementing partners, sometimes the implementing partners focus more on the donor than on the beneficiary. When governments are working with implementing partners, sometimes the question is the funding relationships and the incentives rather than simply the markets. And I'm going to go through a series of situations where people have tried to resolve these problems in ways that met everyone's needs. So let me add first 4 complications that I think are very important in the world where aflatoxin and PICS bags and Harvest Plus operate. And that's a world where we care about agricultural production, but not only agricultural production. We care about agricultural production and perhaps food security or food safety or nutrition. And when we add these other considerations, and when we care about poor farmers and poor consumers, we have at least 4 other complications. And they've been mentioned by some of the speakers prior to myself. One is it's extremely hard to protect intellectual property. So if you're the first one, if you're the innovator, you make all the expenditure to develop a new technology, but everybody can get access to it. Not always, but frequently. That means it's better for some people to wait instead of to move first. That's the opposite of what we want. We want as many people aggressively innovating as possible, but as long as it's hard to protect that property and to get a value from it, it's going to be difficult to get the private sector to make those investments. Secondly, some of the benefits we care about are difficult to monetize. You can't necessarily always charge the consumer the full price of things, either because they can't pay it, because they're poor or because they don't see it. Think about something like improved nutrition. Improved nutrition is important to everyone, but it's not obvious that eating an orange sweet potato is more nutritious than eating a regular sweet potato. Someone has to come to appreciate that and really see the value. And sometimes that value takes a long time to show. What about aflatoxin? Aflatoxin, of course, is a terrible disease, but I don't think it's obvious to every farmer when he or she has aflatoxin, or that this particular product will reduce it, or that they can sell their product for more without aflatoxin. The third problem is that some of these things we're trying to innovate only work at a large scale. Think about things that affect trade. As long as we have problems with aflatoxin, we're going to have trouble exporting those commodities. And that problem only goes away on a large scale when many, many, many people adopt the new technologies. So there are large, what the economists call economies of scale, but it's hard to get everyone to act together. Whose job is it to produce that collective action? And finally, what I'm calling crowding out versus crowding in. The logic of trying to make change and change for the social good is we want the private sector to crowd in. We want to take actions that persuade the private sector to invest. But sometimes by mistake, the things we do actually push them out. So for example, when governments or donors distribute things for free, or when they give subsidies in some places that aren't available to everyone, what it does, instead of bringing the private sector in, is it makes it difficult or unattractive for the private sector to compete. So we're looking for crowding in, but sometimes by mistake, we get crowding out instead. So let's see what it would look like if we tried to do this with scale in mind and we really remembered all of those considerations and challenges that I just talked about. First of all, we would come up with a vision of what it would really look like for this product or this technology or this service to be delivered at scale. Who would be delivering it? Who would they be delivering it to? What would they be charging for it? What distribution channels would they be using? What would that look like? So begin with a vision of the end in mind, and then recognize a few things. Recognize that agriculture is not a social sector. It's a business. Unless everybody at every stage of the value chain is making a profit, it's only going to be as strong as the weakest link. And for that reason, philanthropy, it's important, but it's no substitute for governments and markets in a permanent way, creating viable value chains that work for everyone. Third, sometimes large companies have a very large role to play, either most typically in either input supply or at the other end of the value chain. And sometimes we have a kind of a romantic notion about this. All we need to do is get this big company to come in. The big companies are important, but we need to really, really, really understand their motives, their incentives, and how to make this work for them. Because sometimes what's good for them is also good for small producers and consumers. Sometimes it's not, and sometimes we need to make adjustments. It's important to use projects, what I call surgically, not to see projects as a substitute for the permanent changes. Use the project as a way to make those permanent changes. How do we take some of the risk away? How do we take underwrite some of the cost of experimentation? And finally, recognize that institutionalization at scale takes a long time. If you think about scaling, it has two real pillars: coverage and institutionalization. We know what coverage means. That means how many people are using the product. But institutionalization, we're not so good at managing it. We're not so good at measuring it. We're not so good at incentivizing it. The reason I list all of these is every one of these points is something where the public and the private sector need to find new, better, and more creative ways of working together. Neither one can do it without the other. So let me give you another dimension about the time perspectives on this. This chart, some of you may have seen it before, and it says that scaling proceeds in 3 phases. We have an innovation. First, we worry about effectiveness. Does it work? Does it produce a result? Then this chart says we worry about efficiency. How can we do it cheaper? How can we do it easier? And then finally, we worry about expansion. How do we get it to more people? Well, for many years, I thought this chart was correct, and I taught it and I used it. I've been involved in scaling 300 or 400 technologies. This was, for many years, the way I went about it. Now I think this is wrong. And here's why I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong because if you wait so long to worry about scaling, if you say all we're going to do is produce something that really works, and then we'll worry about how to make it efficiently, and then we'll worry about how to scale it, it's too late. By the time you do that, you will have created an innovation or a solution which is either too expensive or too complicated, or simply doesn't recognize the realities of the situation. Only if we start to think about scaling way from the beginning, even before we know if it's going to work, do we design things correctly. And one way to think about this is while one foot is on the accelerator, the other foot needs to stay on the brake. Here's what I mean by that. What I mean is you need a foot on the brake because you're not sure yet if this intervention, if this technology, if this business model is going to work. But even before you're sure, you have to start laying the foundations, taking the beginning steps necessary for scale. Psychologically and managerially, this is difficult to do, but the things that I've watched that have scaled successfully have all done this. And I can tell you, every entrepreneur I know thinks this way. As soon as they have an idea, they're beginning to think about scale, even before they know the answers to the other questions. Governments and donors have a very hard time thinking this way. They want the thing to be proven first before you start taking the next steps. So let me give you another way to think about this. Think about it as 3 gears that are all spinning. The one on the left-hand side, let's call it innovation. So that's research institutes, innovators, entrepreneurs that are coming up with new ideas and new approaches and new breakthroughs. In my opinion, we can always do better on that, but I think that gear is spinning pretty well. The research labs, the private research institutes, and the private companies are generating an enormous number of innovations, and every year that number grows. What about the big gear on the right-hand side? That's businesses and commercial markets and sometimes governments that deliver goods and services. Again, we could improve it, but that's not, in my opinion, where the big problem is either. The problem, I think, is that little blue gear in the middle, the one that's called intermediation. And that's the thing that connects the innovations to the delivery. So we've got innovators innovating and we've got deliverers delivering, but we're missing some of the things we need to connect those to. And what are those things? Those are things like this: fundraising, investment packaging, change management, sometimes aggregation, a whole series of things which in the private sector, in the high margin private sector, are done by venture capital, by investment banking, by aggressive investors. In our world, in the world of pro-poor agricultural technologies that are trying to solve food and nutrition problems as well as income problems, often nobody does these things. So we have the innovators innovating, to go back for 1 second, we have the innovators innovating, we have the deliverers delivering, but the innovations are not transferred over into the delivery systems. So what do we do about that? Well, the first is we learn from cases that have done this successfully. And some years ago, I was asked at the company that I ran for many years called Management Systems International to do research on 5 cases: hybrid maize in Zambia, irrigated rice in Senegal, 2-wheel tractors in Bangladesh, PICS bags, the very same PICS bags we're talking about here today, in Kenya and DRC, broiler chickens in Uganda. Then my friend and colleague Julie and I were asked by the African Development Bank and by Purdue to produce a source book on scaling. And in looking at the cases of successful scaling, we highlighted a number, but 3 of the ones that we spent quite a lot of time on were 1 Acre Fund, Babangona, and Hello Tractor, trying to understand the business models that really drove those innovations. And then there are, of course, several well-documented cases that you've heard referred to today. One of the ones I think is very well written up is the orange sweet potato case. It was developed around the Harvest Plus work. There's also been a lot of work on heat-tolerant maize, on Rift Valley fever vaccine. My colleagues at Tetra Tech have done 2, I think, very interesting cases. One on E-Verify and Ag-Verify in Uganda that tries to use barcodes and so on to reduce counterfeiting, and one on trying to, with support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, look for ways to aggregate agronomic information so that everybody can use it. If you dig into these cases, you find in each one some set of solutions to the problems that I've been mentioning, into a couple of more that I'm going to go on to right now. So I'm going to end with 10 lessons, some of which I've already mentioned, some of which I'm going to be introducing for the first time. Here's the first one. There is no such thing as a purely commercial pathway to scale. What do I mean by that? I mean governments and private businesses need each other in agriculture. That's true in developing countries. It's equally true in developed countries. If you look at Europe or the United States, the role of government, their fingerprints are on everything to do with agriculture. The way prices are set, the way subsidies are controlled, the way research is funded, and so on. So the fact that in agriculture, we still haven't always found the best way for government and private sector to work together is an absolutely top priority to try and improve. Second, we know about partnerships at the top and the bottom of the value chain, but I want to suggest to you that some of the most important partnerships are in the middle of the value chain. Things that have to do with, for example, financing, that have to do with equipment leasing, things that are not necessarily big businesses. These are not big international firms that are doing it. These are usually national companies that organize themselves to try to make sure that the weak links in the chain are filled in. Some of you are in those businesses, and it's a good thing you are, but we need more. Third, the biggest bottlenecks to scaling pro-poor agricultural innovations are usually not technological. They usually have to do with things like risk and economies of scale and policy and regulation and sometimes subsidy and how those things are done. So things like warehousing schemes and insurance arrangements, things of that sort that really deal with what is it that's truly preventing consumers from consuming these goods and producers from using them. And once in a while, it's the technology, but more often than not, it's not the technology that's holding it back. Fourth, poor farmers don't have the luxury of thinking about the long term. If they worried only about the long term, they would starve to death in the short term. So their time horizons tend to be very short. So something which will show a return, say 3 years out of 6, normally won't work because they have to worry about this year. And something where the returns are high, but the risk is also high, probably won't work either because they can't afford the risk. They would rather be safe than sorry in that situation. So unless we can do something to de-risk some of these interventions and to make sure the benefits appear in short time horizons, it's going to be difficult to get high adoption rates. Number 5, monopoly or monopsony are sometimes really useful in the short run. Why? Remember the problems I was talking about with intellectual property and with the difficulty to get someone to make an investment in something, sometimes the only way to get that moving is to give people exclusive licenses of one sort or another. But that will turn out to be a problem later on. It's not a reason not to do it, but when we do it, we need to be realistic about the fact that at some point it's going to become a problem, and we're going to need to find a way to build competition into the system, if not at the beginning, at least as we go forward. I call lesson 6, think subtraction, not addition. And what I mean by that is something I mentioned before, which is when people design things to be effective, but they don't worry at the beginning about scaling, they make them too complicated and too expensive. So from the very beginning, ask yourself, can I make this simpler? Can I make this cheaper? Even if it means it reduces the effectiveness a little bit. That really upsets researchers. I know that, because those of us in research are trying to find the most effective solution to a problem. But if you're thinking about scale, you're not only thinking about what they call effect size, but you're thinking about scalability. And scalability benefits tremendously by low cost, low unit cost, and by low complexity. So the sooner and the more dramatically you can introduce those, the better. Lesson 7, scale and sustainability are not two different things, they're two sides of the same coin. So whenever someone says to you, I'm going to scale this, your response should be, yes, but will it be sustainable? And if they say it's sustainable, your response should be, yes, but at what scale? And that means those of us on the donor side need to worry hard about the sustainability side, not just push for larger and larger numbers of rollout, or we'll get things that will reach scale, but they won't stay there. Lesson 8, the devil is in the details, especially logistics. When we do things on a small scale, we control most of those factors. But when it goes to a large scale, there are a bazillion logistic considerations. And most of the things I've seen that failed to scale, it was either a policy constraint or a logistic constraint that stopped it. So we need to find organizations and platforms that have the ability to do things that are complicated and then have a lot of moving parts. That's not the technology, that has to do with the scaling of the technology. Number 9 is the ability to pivot, to change directions is critical. Almost nothing that I've been involved in scaling followed a straight line. Again, if you heard the examples of the aflatoxin case or the PICS bag case or the Harvest Plus case, you heard really interesting examples in response to Marcella's question where people had to make changes along the way. And the question is, can we leave them, if we're donors or governments, can we leave them the space to make those changes, or are we so rigid that it's impossible for people to make those changes? And finally, I would say never waste a crisis. And I don't mean that to be cruel, but for example, the pandemic crisis we're in now has created more willingness to innovate than I've seen in my entire career. And the ability to find that sense of urgency and really channel it in the direction of some of the sorts of changes we're talking about, I think is not only important, I think it's very possible and perhaps even critical. So let me end this part by simply saying, a bad system will defeat a good innovation every time. So for those of you who are focused on the technical innovation, bless you for it, but your work is not done. You need to figure out all the things that stand between that and it being truly adopted and sustainably adopted by large numbers of people, which almost necessarily means by large numbers of businesses, which means that every one of those businesses needs to be able to do that with acceptable risk and attractive profits. Now, for those of you who want to know more about this or who just want to join in the discussion, as I mentioned, Julie Howard and I wrote this source book on scaling agricultural innovation. Here's a link to that. There's also a community of practice that that I've chaired for the last 6 years on scaling. Here's an email on that one, and any of you who would like to become part of that, you're most welcome to do so. And it has 2 working groups, one on agriculture and rural development, one on nutrition. Again, these are open access, no charge. Anyone who'd like to be part of that is most welcome to do so. I'd like to just, if I could, end by, let's see, maybe I can't, maybe I don't know how to get on my own share, but I'll say then, let me just say a word to the donors and the governments who are listening in right now. Many people on the call are private businesses or they're researchers, but they take their cues from you, the donors, and you, the governments, on this. And if you're sending the wrong signals, it's almost impossible to encourage the right kind of innovation on this, no matter how willing, no matter how creative those private sector investors are. So there's a disproportionate burden on you to think your way through this and say, not how do we plan a good project, not how do we create a temporary program, but how do we make a permanent, sustainable change in the marketplace that's beneficial to the people we're trying to serve and to everyone along the way in trying to serve that audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Coley, for those very, very insightful thoughts. I don't think I can add anything. I would love to agree that a bad system will defeat a good innovation anytime, but probably also add that we should not let yesteryears hold us hostage and take advantage of really the opportunity that COVID has presented. But to really respond to your very insightful comments, and I think you've got quite a number of comments in the chat, commending your thoughtful views. I encourage you to look at them and see what else you can share. Let me welcome Dr. Mark Schutt, who is the Senior Innovation and Scaling Scientist, who will respond to your presentation. Mark Schutt is a senior scientist working with Wageningen University and the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. He also works as a strategic advisor on innovation, scaling, and stage gating at the 1CG Center. He is one of the founding fathers of scaling readiness approach that seek to support organizations in developing, implementing, and monitoring impactful innovations. He has published a number of scientific articles, over 40, and obviously he brings some expertise to this conversation. So over to you, Dr. Mark. Do help us understand if you have noted a few key things that you'd like to raise and follow on from Dr. Lawrence's presentation. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to respond to Dr. Coley's presentation. It's always a pleasure to respond to some of Larry's work, and I had the privilege to build on some of his excellent work in my own professional career. And I wanted to respond to the presentation. I think Dr. Coley touched upon 3 different things related to scaling, and I will say a few things about each of these aspects of scaling. So the first one is the practice of scaling. The second one is the science of scaling. And the third one is the systemic changes that are needed to improve the innovation and scaling performance in the agricultural sector. So I think, let me start with the first one, the practice of scaling. And even before listening to the presentation, I had made some notes emphasizing also that we need to design programs, projects, investments with scale in mind. So scaling, we see that often it's something that happens towards the end of a program or of a project. By then, usually the building blocks for actually achieving scale, they are not in place. So we really need to start thinking with scale in mind. What I also really liked, and what I also see in my own work, is that we need to move away from simplistic ideas about scaling and develop a much more realistic view on what it takes to achieve impact at scale. And I think what helps is, inflating what we mean with impact at scale. We're not talking about 3,000 farmers or 30,000 farmers. We're talking about 30 million farmers. What are the mechanisms? What are the approaches that we need to put in place to work with or reach these kinds of numbers? And also that this takes time. I think I've seen many project proposals where there's a proposal where to develop an idea into something that's been used by 2 or 3 million farmers in 3 years of time. It usually doesn't work like that. I also, most of the cases that I've described, we also see that innovation and scaling pathways, they usually take at least 15 years. And that has obviously implications for how we work. One of the other reflections on the practice of scaling is also that if you work with private sector, don't expect private sector to say like, wow, you have a nice innovation and we will use it one-on-one in our business models. No, research innovations, they are usually way too complex, way too expensive, and they need some kind of unpacking and repacking before they can be useful as part of a business strategy. And usually, making some adjustments, lowering the production cost, and etc. That's all part of a scaling process. And we should not expect private sector to just, come and shop in the research center and say like, oh, we'll take this, and we'll take that, and then next year offer it to their clients. It doesn't work like that. Also, in the practice of scaling, I think what I've seen in the research for development sectors is that there's often investment in scaling of innovations that are not proven to work. And that's very tricky business because we actually run the risk that we start scaling innovations that can have a negative impact or an impact that we are not sure of. And so I very much advocate more evidence-based approaches to scaling where we have some good evidence that the innovations that we want to promote at scale, that they actually work for a specific outcome. Last on the practice of scaling is that we need to accept that not all innovative ideas will actually result into innovations that have impact at scale. I think we need to accept that out of the 100 ideas, maybe only 5 will reach impact at scale. And it doesn't mean that the other 95 that they have failed, but it just means that in the process of learning and trying to develop them, we discovered that the idea, was maybe not as good as we thought. So sometimes you also have to kill your darlings, and that in the research for development sector, there needs to be much more focus on learning and accepting that not all good ideas will work in the end. So that's about the practice of scaling. I think something else maybe that Larry didn't touch upon too much, but that I've been working on a lot is the science of scaling. So one of the basic principles is that the good practice of scaling needs to be informed by good science of scaling. And there's a lot that we have learned. There's even more that we still need to learn about scaling. And much of what I will say in this part of my response is based on a special issue that we did in Elsevier's agricultural system last year called The Science of Scaling. And I'm actually copying now the link to the special issue in the chat. And in the editorial, we try to bring together all the lessons from, I think, 11 publications and trying to think a little bit like, what does this mean for people that want to do science on scaling? And the first finding was really that, and it's a bit linked to what I've just said, is that we need to understand much better the big picture of scaling innovation. And we can do that by ex-post analysis of innovation and scaling pathways. And one of the papers that I would definitely recommend you to read is an assessment of the orange flesh sweet potato innovation and scaling journey by Jen Lowe, World Food Prize winner, and Graham Thiel, director of the Roots, Tubers and Bananas CGIAR research program. And I think, those kinds of stories and those kinds of analysis, they can really help us to better understand what it takes to achieve impact at scale. Also, as part of this big picture of scaling, and Larry also said it, that we can learn a lot from other sectors. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, scaling in the health and educational sector, they are a bit more advanced than us in the agricultural sector, and we can learn a lot from that. And we can also learn a lot from big companies and how they approach maybe what they call marketing, and try to see what kind of lessons are there for the research and development sector. The second domain that we discovered as part of Science of Scaling is that we need tools, we need instruments, we need approaches that can help the design and implementation of better scaling strategies. And Larry also touched upon that usually the bottlenecks for scaling, they are not technological bottlenecks. But still, if we look at how, for example, CJR is investing, and probably 80% or even more goes into technology development rather than in addressing some of the non-technological bottlenecks for innovation and scaling. So can we use approaches, can we use tools that can help us to make better choices in terms of where do we invest in? And in other words, like also how do we drive with one foot on the gas pedal and the other one on the brake? How do we do that in practice? Because it's not easy. There's a couple of tools that are out there, and I wanted to highlight the scaling scan and scaling readiness approach that can help research for development project teams, but also organizations in developing better scaling strategies. And the last one is a little bit related to the conducive environment. So a bad system will defeat a good innovation. So what does a good system look like? I think this is, again, it's probably easier to ask the question than to answer it. But there's all kinds of, it has to do with all kinds of incentive systems, partnership models, monitoring, evaluation, and learning approaches. So what does it look like, a conducive environment for scaling? The last reflection, so I've talked a little bit about the practice of scaling, I've talked a little bit about the science of scaling, is about these systemic changes that are needed to improve the scaling performance. And here, I think all stakeholders have a role to play. And maybe I can give some examples. For example, for donors, a couple of lessons. I think one thing is if you fund research for development, then we need to accept as a community, but definitely also the donors, that not all investments can, will, or need to result in impact at scale. And I think this is, it's probably stating the obvious, but still, like in many of the proposals, immediately we are asked to make all kinds of projections about how will this contribute to reaching large numbers of beneficiaries. Whereas maybe the question is like, can we first prove that this actually works? And if yes, for which beneficiaries? Secondly, for donors, again, continue to invest in blue sky research. Some of these ideas will be the scalable innovations of the future. I see that especially in research for development sector, many of the donors, they are very keen to fund scaling. But we need to understand that what we can scale today was an innovative idea maybe 15 years ago, which was funded by someone, develop it, test it, validate it. And all of a sudden we saw that it works, and then everybody wants to jump on it, which is great, of course, but we need to think in terms of a pipeline. There needs to be innovations at all different kinds of stages, so that we make sure that we still have new solutions 10, 15 years from now. And maybe also a humble advice from my side is that for donors, don't fund the actual scaling, but fund incubation, where research, private sector, government, and etc. can come together and think about how could we develop strategies, implement strategies that can actually make this innovation available at scale. Also, some advice for research for development networks. I think IITA has given a great example that in order to support scaling of innovation, you need to have divisions and directorates that improve, that can actually improve the scaling performance. And scaling is different from doing research. So you also need different kinds of people, different kinds of competency. To develop an innovation, you may need somebody with a PhD. To scale it, you need somebody who understands policy, politics, private sector, and etc. And sometimes it's useful to have all of that expertise in-house. But also those different kinds of processes, research versus delivery, they need different kinds of skills, competencies, but also incentive systems. I also have a message for private sector. And it's a little bit related to what was said before. Actively engage and be critical. I think what happens a lot is that private sector, small or big, they sometimes see research or development organizations as donors, where they somehow lose maybe a little bit this critical perspective of, is this actually useful for us? Would we invest our own money in this? Do we see clientele for this? Be critical and also tell research no if you think something's not going to work, or if you think that there's no need for this kind of product. But if you see value, then co-invest. Let's try to create a level playing field between private sector, between research and clients, and co-invest in developing and scaling innovations that can actually achieve impact at scale. I think maybe last but not least, for me, it's clear that we all, investors or donors, research, governments, and private sector, we have a role to play. And it's not so much, well, let me state it differently. It's very much about like how can we come together and collaborate in a meaningful way. And there's a lot of challenges in working with private sector. There's also a lot of opportunities in working with private sector. And I hope that over the course of this webinar, over the course of the next 3 days, we can have a clear message and hopefully some very good examples of what this collaborative space can look like, and also how we can institutionalize that in our agricultural research and delivery or research and development sector. Thank you so much.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Dr. Markshoot. I think you are very succinct in your presentation. Again, I would like to thank you for the great insights and refer you to the chat. There are a couple of comments that have been addressed to you, but largely most of them were thanking you for the very wise words that you've shared with us today. I think I would like to move on very fast because we are running out of time and introduce our four-man panel, using the word man deliberately because there's no lady on the panel, which is sad, but just, four gentlemen. Let me introduce them very quickly. I will allow each one of them 1 minute to introduce themselves because I think that will allow us to be fast as opposed to me reading the whole profile. And in no particular order, allow me to introduce Mr. Yarid Satish, General Manager, Shayayon, Ethiopia. Please put on your cameras when I introduce you. The second gentleman is Mr. Martins Awofisayo, CEO, Harvest Industries Limited from Nigeria. We do have their profiles on the screen as well. And the third gentleman is Mr. Babhida Singh, Business Manager, A to Z Textile Mills Limited from Tanzania. And the next, last but not least, Mr. Pelumi Ari Bisal, CEO, Kato Foods, Nigeria. So as you realize, all of these are private sector actors. And, Dr. Mark did allude to the fact that we need to work with policy, practice, and private sector. So they will be sharing with us really their experiences, the evolution from shelf to adoption, the major challenges that they have faced, and what key messages they would like to take out. And I would like to draw the four of you to the 3 discussions we've already had. What are your key takeaways from that as well? So do land your messages within, what we had from both Dr. Coley and Dr. Mark in regard to this conversation. So starting off this, I would like to invite Mr. Yarid to really quickly, 1 minute, introduce yourself, then quickly walk through us your experience in engaging with the stakeholders in commercializing afla-safe pigs bags and biofortified foods, as well as how your strategy evolved, what you learned, and what you would stop doing, you know, advising the multiple stakeholders on this call. Thank you, and over. The same questions will apply to everybody, so I won't have to repeat them. Over to you, Yared.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again. Yeah, let me indeed briefly introduce myself. I am Yared Serza. I'm the general manager of Shashone, and our company is engaged in 3 business lines: manufacturing and distribution of hermetic storage bag, and also agricultural advisory service. Last but not least, export and import. Export includes our own manufactured pigs bag. So like we are not a big company. We are a company of close to 100 people, but growing, certainly much grew for the last 1 year or 2 years. And it is still evolving. So maybe to start with the first question, like, you know, how did it start, and, you know, how did it emerge over a period of time? I think it's our company manufactures and distributes the pigs bag, and we started initially as a consultant to the pigs 3 project to commercialize the bags here in Ethiopia, and that started in 2014. And by then it was like more of providing a service, and at the beginning, we managed, like during the year 1, we pushed like 9,000 bags, but we had challenges like for the next 3 years, private manufacturers could not seriously take up or supply the product in terms of like on time and also to the scales that we wanted, and it became a serious challenge. And starting from the 3rd year, we moved into you know, kind of like getting it manufactured at third-party facility and then distribute ourselves, and that resulted a significant step forward. So maybe like the demand or the supply grew by, I would say, from 9,000 to close to 300,000. But I think, you know, that is not the whole story. Still, I think like we moved up later. It was last year we moved into manufacturing, and overall, I think between 2014 until 2021, as of this year, we have pushed close to 2 million bags, and we started with the Ethiopian market, but we managed now to expand to Somalia and Sudan in the neighboring countries, and our sales actually tripled from last year. And we are anticipating, we still are in the middle of the harvesting season, and we are anticipating some more sales. I think, yeah, in terms of the key challenges, maybe in terms of what really worked before I move to the challenge, I think like in our case, we combined 3 things. One is, I think we have the market development, we have the supply chain development, and we have the partnership development. A little bit, the fact that we evolved from a knowledge sector somehow helped us, because we knew the development sector, we knew the government sector, and also we have the private orientation. So in the process, when we developed the market, we really went to the ground. We did so many village demonstration, market demonstration, and ICT aided radio commercials. So it's really resulted effective demand. But at the same time, I think like creating the demand was not the whole story. We managed to reach out the product in space and time. And we have, like we established network of over 300 vendors, and those vendors are connected to user resellers who are reaching product from rural towns to the village, so that farmers will get easy access within their village. And of course, the 3rd pillar is a partnership mobilization. Initially, we got the support from Pigs 3, but we didn't end there. We mobilized development partners here in Ethiopia, including USAID, SNB, and a number of other donor organizations. who could finance or embed the product in their interventions. And that really helped a lot to speed up the scaling. The challenges that we faced along the way, I think, the dynamics of the challenge really changed. And the initial was the supply challenge. And we addressed that by moving into our own manufacturing facility. But right now, basically, the key challenges that we are facing are more of, how we can really sustain growth. And, to move like 2 million bags within a period of, say, 6 months or 7 months, it requires a bit of experience in terms of logistics, a bit of experience in terms of planning, and also, of course, financial resources to be spent well ahead of time, so that, whatever we push during the peak season is stocked during the off season. And this is really a major challenge. But I think at the same time, as we grow from one country to a 3-country, the market dynamics in the other countries are different. The what worked in Ethiopia doesn't work in Sudan. It requires some tweaking. And in fact, like our vendor in Sudan, she imported like few hundred bags, 100,000 bags, but still the bags are in stock, and we really need to support in terms of the extension, in terms of the market commercialization, and all those things. But the challenge is like, we only know well the Ethiopian market, and the Sudanese market is different from the Ethiopian case. And the other challenge which we right now really suffering is, of course, the dynamics following the COVID and the existing global situation. Price of raw materials have really gone up. So a year ago, raw materials that we normally used to purchase for a price of $900 per metric ton, now it is $1,600, $1,700 per metric ton, and this has really made us very susceptible. The challenge with price is, for a product that you channel to smallholder farmers, you cannot change price as and when you want. Probably like in a season, we can change a price once, but we cannot change price in the middle of the season, and even we cannot make a big change in once. And that made us really, like, that's giving us a bit of a hard time. But overall, I think as we look forward, I think the one thing that we still want to keep in order to address these problems, I think we really need to leverage additional partnership. So maybe like in leveraging more and more partners who could help us reduce some of our overhead costs, and also a bit of scale our operation in Sudan and Somalia, which will help us a bit also to finance, or at least to distribute the low margin here in Ethiopia. I think those are the major issues. Maybe how do I relate the discussion or the presentations of the previous 2 presentations to our experience? I must say those are extremely, very valuable. And the 2-3 things that I could say is, I like, the missing gap. I think like in commercialization, most donors and knowledge organizations, they tend to focus, it's a bit of like end to end, like it's more of a story of a smallholder farmer, and then a story of, maybe a high-end innovation. In between, there are, entrepreneurs struggling to get a hold of finance, to get even proper understanding of the market dynamics. So an investment that could help the entrepreneurs to reach in scale, in time, and also penetrate more is something that I would say is very important to carry an innovation from the shelf to the farmers. And the second thing is, I think co-innovation could be very important. I think entrepreneurship by itself, or the private sector by itself, may not understand the complexities of marketing, particularly in African context or in countries like Ethiopia. The complexity of marketing to smallholder farmers, or reaching thousands of villages within a short period of time, is expensive, and also the knowledge is definitely missing. So this is where the knowledge sector, the development partners could really help the private sector understand the cost involved, and in some cases also a bit of like normalize the potential risk and the cost which could go to the private sector, so that the private sector take a step forward to reach the products or to serve the market. I think let me stop it here, Age. Maybe if there are questions, I will come back later. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Yarid, for those insightful comments. So what I was hearing is basically, logistical challenges, go-to-market complexities, lack of knowledge for new markets that you try to get into. So the need to have partners that can de-risk you. So those seem to be really common constraints that we tend to see even as AGRA in all the 11 countries in which we operate. And it would be keen to see how, as you ask to leverage additional partners, how we can, de-risk entry to market through some of our, our smallholder entrepreneurs, micro-scale entrepreneurs that would be able to help you reach those markets quicker. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Martins Awofisayo, CEO Harvest Industries Limited, Nigeria, to also quickly share his, introduce himself, share his experience. And I'm hoping that Martin, you'll be able to share with us some numbers, because there's no private sector actor who speaks without telling us whether he's breaking even or, margins of entry and all that. So we'll be keen to hear, where the rubber meets the road for your P&L as well. Thank you, and over to you, Martin.
Okay. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, good morning, and good night. I am Martin Awofisayo, the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Harvest Field Industries Limited, Lagos, Nigeria. Harvest Field is a 21-year-old company with a turnover of $40 million per annum. And we are the leading agrochemical manufacturing and distribution company in Nigeria for the past 20 years. We have 27 warehouses and offices in Nigeria, distributing agrochemicals and other inputs for farmers. Nigeria is divided into 6 regions, and Harvest Field are presently in all the 6 regions and all the agricultural sink areas. So our distribution network is very, very important to us, and is the best in the industry, because we reach farmers and the farmers are able to reach our products at short distance. We decided to invest in Aflasive because we saw it as part of our core competency. Harvest Field core business areas are actually in the area of seed business, crop protection, public health, and agricultural equipment. So Aflasive is coming as part of our core competency areas, so which we believe that we enable us to provide more opportunities to our teeming farmers nationwide. And the major reason for investing in Aflasive is to complete our process of making Harvest Field as the one bus stop for farmers in Nigeria for their inputs that are required for the farming. And other areas why we are also investing in Aflasive is the huge market opportunity that are available in Nigeria. We have about 8.5 million hectares of groundnut and maize farms in scope in Nigeria, which is a huge market and a huge opportunity for us. So if AflaSafe is adopted and deployed into these 8.5 million hectares, so you can understand the business opportunities that are available for us. And apart from that, we also have 6.3 million hectares of smallholder consumption of farmers. So this is a huge opportunity that is not even available in anywhere in Africa. So Nigeria is a huge market opportunity for AflaSafe. And then we also looked at also the changing policy environment. In Nigeria now, farming are no longer hobby or whatever you can call it, a way of life. It is now a business. So over the last 10 years, Nigeria have started changing and diversifying into agriculture because oil and gas are fading out. So agriculture is now becoming a business opportunity in Nigeria. So therefore, we are already there waiting for that. Then coming to the experience we have had with engagement with IITA in the last 3 to 4 years. We started by going through the selection process. The selection process started with our participation in an investor forum where ATTC was able to present the commercialization strategy of AflaSafe to us. So we participated in that investment forum, and we were really attracted to the opportunities therein, which I've mentioned earlier on. So with this, we decided to even contact IITA immediately to be appointed as a distributor of AflaSafe. So we started from the moment we attended the investment forum, because we saw a great opportunity there. So we started as a distributor working with ag resorts and started selling AflaSafe. So the first, as a distributor, we started selling as the first figure we sold, that was in 2017, was a 98 metric ton. As a distributor, just for us to see the opportunity therein. So then we waited for the announcement, official announcement of invitation to bid for AflaSafe technology. So when the announcement came on board, we immediately applied by submitting our expression of interest to IITA. So the expression of interest was considered and shortlisted. So we were part of the screening process with other bidders, including a due diligence on harvest field. So this led us to preparation of our business plan for AflaSafe technology and commercialization by harvest field. So this business plan became our Bible as a Christian for us to ensure that is implemented. So this business plan took us to Dakar in Senegal to meet the board of ATTC. And we defended our business plan there, and we were able to convince them after we got the results of our interaction in Senegal. So eventually on the 12th of March, to save time, we were 2018, we were granted the license to commercialize AflaSafe in Nigeria. The technology transfer and licensing agreement was signed between Harvest Field and IITA on the 12th of March. So from there on, we started our engagement process with IITA. Now that as a private sector, we have taken over the AflaSafe commercialization. So now we started our engagement. The first thing IITA did was to provide a TOT training for all our team. And we have 27 warehouses. So we have about 250 technical staff nationwide. So all these 250 were brought together, and the TOT training was conducted for them, and which gave us a lot of insight into the use and application of AflaSafe. So this took place in Ibadan at IITA. So immediately after the TOT, what did we do as HarvestFeed? Was to start introducing and creating awareness through technical support demonstrations to all our teaming farmers. You know, we have been in this business of input supply and manufacturing to farmers in Nigeria for almost 20 years now. So we already know the farmers, we know where they are, and they are already using our pesticides product that we have been selling to them for the past almost 20 years. So going into them and demonstrating the use and application of AflaSafe was not a difficult terrain for us. So we also got introduction to agri-resort implementers, which HarvestFeed decided to take them up and appoint them as our distributors, and we started supplying through them as well. Then after that, we also engaged IITA on the development of business cases to support the marketing efforts. All the below the line, above the line, my promotional materials were jointly developed, and they assisted us also in advocacy, in policy support with stakeholders, and so on and so forth. So it was very engaging and very encouraging and very supportive. And the next one, which I want to share with you, is the strategy that we employed after we have gotten the TTLA license, was that we made AflaSafe business as an SBU in HarvestFeed, special business unit. So we separated the staff, the technical staff that are in charge are separated so that they can be focused on the introduction and adoption of AflaSafe by our teaming farmers. So what we first did was this SBU to focus on the target business plan that we have. And with this, we were able to achieve a lot of sales through this, our efforts. And we started in 2018. You know, in 2017, we were able to sell 98 metric tons. And 2018, this grew to almost 460 metric tons of AflaSafe, because we were trying to see how we can achieve our target stated in the business plan. And of course, in 2019, it grew up from 460 in 2018 to 931 metric tons of AflaSafe that we have deployed on our own. And of course, in 2020,
we've lost you. That is a signal that you are losing your time. I'm quite impressed to hear about your great journey that speaks to a very healthy bottom line. I will be keen to understand at what point you did break even indeed, so that you can give confidence to our community of practice that actually these technologies can be adopted to scale and can deliver a profitable bottom line for entrepreneurs. That said, I will come back to you later, but allow me to introduce Singh, who's the business manager of A to Z Textile Mills Limited. Singh, over to you again for a quick introduction, and please observe time. You've got exactly 7 minutes to introduce yourself, walk us through your journey, tell us the challenges and what should stop to be done or done more of within the 7 minutes. Over to you, Singh.
Thank you so much, Aggie. I hope I am audible. I am Bhupinder.
I think you are on mute.
No, I'm not.
Hear you. I don't know whether the rest can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
I think the back end could unmute you. It could be the team, the technical team on the back end. Can you please unmute?
I think you have a problem, Aggie.
Yes, Bhupinder.
Hello.
The screen shows he's not on mute. We can't hear you, Singh. Or is it me? Can anyone hear Singh?
Please go ahead. We can hear you, Singh.
Yeah, you can hear me fine. Great. Can you hear Singh?
Yes.
As well?
We can hear Singh. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes,
thank
as
you
well.
so much.
So in that case, Singh, please proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Aggie. And I am Bhupinder. I represent the AgroZ Strategic Business Unit for the A to Z Group. A to Z Group is a family-owned and managed company based out of Arusha in Tanzania. It has over 50 years of manufacturing experience. The company employs 8,000 plus Tanzanians, of which more than 60% are women. It is the largest manufacturer of bed nets in Africa, both polyester and long-lasting insecticidal nets called LLINs for the prevention of malaria. Besides, it also manufactures knitting garment, woven polypropylene bags, household plastics, PET bottles, and packaging materials. It has a fleet of long hauler trucks to deliver efficiently within the East African countries. Africa Technical Research Center, ATRC, AgroZ's private research and development center, is operating as a joint venture with Sumitomo Chemicals Company Limited, Japan, since June 2012. AgroZ Bag Plus is A to Z's patented research product from ATRC. It is a post-harvest storage solution for dried grains and pulses against all insect pests, including Rajo grain borer, LGB, and bean bruchids. Launched in November 2015, it is now available in Tanzania, Kenya, Zambia, Uganda, Mozambique, Sudan, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. We will soon be launching in Malawi and Rwanda. Interventions in the maize value chain by the AgroZ products like AgroZ Maize Sheller, AgroZ Tarpaulin, and AgroZ Bag Plus for storage tempted us to add another intervention on the biological control of aflatoxin through AflaSafe TZ01. This adds into the existing sales and distribution infrastructure in place, thus lowering the operating cost. Tanzania produced 6.3 million metric tons of maize in 2020, spread in 2 million hectares of land cultivation. Considering 2% penetration of this production with AflaSafe TZ01, we are talking of 400 metric tons of AflaSafe TZ01 application in a single year, which translates to 2.7 million USD sales revenue. How it started? It started with the business opportunity presented during the Investors Forum in 2018. This whole process was led by IITA under the ATTC project. It was a competitive call, and there were 4 major applicants shortlisted from Tanzania for the final franchisee award. During the Investors Forum, we expressed interest in exploring possibility of investing in AflaSafe. Subsequently, we received the AflaSafe commercialization strategy document alongside other materials, which not only helped us understand the opportunity, but also helped us prepare our business plan. It was a competitive process involving many other companies. Upon extensive evaluation of our technical and financial proposal and due diligence visits, we were awarded the license to manufacture AflaSafe in Tanzania. Business expertise of more than 50 years in Africa, manufacturing expertise, leveraging on the brand AgroZ for horticulture and post-harvest management products, R&D experience, distribution and sales infrastructure, government and other stakeholder relationships, and last but not the least, the capital investment, which we were able to offer to AflaSafe. We received an excellent handholding from the researcher IITA and the important business linkages. The entire AgroZ sales and production staff were trained. Consumer profiling of the large processors, aggregators, millers, breweries, exporters, and feed manufacturers was done and shared. Introduced with SBL, the DIGO, TBL, Submiller, and 1 Acre Fund. Training on the AflaSafe TZ01 production with physical supervision from IITA Technicals. Conduct demonstrations on the effectiveness of the product. So the support which we received from IITA. We have commissioned the AflaSafe plant in August 2020 last year. Total investment is close to USD 370,000 till date. AflaSafe TZ01 has been introduced to the market since February 2020 with the stocks from IITA Dar es Salaam. We have trained the agro dealers across 24 regions in Tanzania. Total sale until date is 6.8 tons, also manufactured 16 metric tons for Mozambique and Malawi. 4 SBL DIGO contractors, growers were who purchased 4.24 metric tons of AflaSafe of application on maize. A total of 60 farmers purchased 240 kg metric tons of AflaSafe for application on maize. Dutch Industries, Iringa, applied 400 kg of AflaSafe on their 100-acre groundnut plantation. We have targeted to sell 50 metric tons in Tanzania, besides manufacturing for other countries as per IITA's advice. And our learnings, the strategy was top-down approach, considering the maximum residual limits compliance by the larger business units. This could trigger the demand for aflatoxin-free maize and groundnuts down to the growers. We started approaching the large processors, aggregators, millers, breweries, exporters, and feed manufacturers. Although the stakeholders were convinced about the aflatoxin control methods, but for the majority of them, there seemed to be no compulsion on adoption. Despite disruption by COVID-19, we managed to forge working partnerships with East African Grain Council. There were 2 conferences organized in Beira and Arusha. The stakeholders and the traders were invited. However, the outcome was not encouraging in the lack of adequate awareness, testing facilities, and enforcement of the EAC standards. Low aflatoxin awareness levels, coupled with poor enforcement of allowable aflatoxin levels in food and feed, greatly limit the huge opportunity of AflaSafe use in Tanzania. There is a need to engage with relevant government ministries and bodies and find areas of collaboration as far as aflatoxin management is concerned, with support from IITA. Leverage output buyers influence, top-bottom approach. A higher uptake of AflaSafe was realized with farmers who are contracted growers for processing, for example, SBL growers. Therefore, in 2021, we will focus on growing and strengthening the type of relationships. Discussions are ongoing with the Nutri Group, 1 Acre Fund, and World Food Program. AflaSafe use extension, a significant number of industrial processors use sorghum and have aflatoxin concerns on that too. Hence, IITA should consider extending the use of AflaSafe to sorghum in Tanzania. We had met with the TBS, the Tanzania Bureau of Standards, to plan a training program with their extension officers. Also plan to have mass behavioral change communication on aflatoxin and the biological control method through AflaSafe. Thank you, Aggie. I hope I have been able to manage with 7 minutes.
You are excellent. At the dot, you are wrapping up. Well done on that. So I think that said, I will quickly invite Pelumi Aribisala, the CEO of Cattle Foods, Nigeria, to walk us through a quick introduction of self and his own lessons learned and the journey so far. Over to you, Mr. Pelumi.
Thank you very much, Aggie. My name is Pelumi Aribisala, and I'm the CEO of Cattle Foods in Nigeria and a co-founder. Cattle Foods is an indigenous company in Nigeria, an indigenous food company that tries to add value to our staple foods so that they can become more nutritious and help to address malnutrition and food security in Nigeria. Cattle Foods started in 2014 officially, and started with about 4 persons. And today, Cattle Food has employed more than 27 staff on the permanent payroll. And we have more than 100 persons across the country that are involved in the distribution channel for cattle foods. Cattle food works with different staple foods, especially biofortified crops. And these biofortified crops include the maize, where we have about 8 maize biofortified varieties in Nigeria today, about 3 OFSP, that is orange flesh sweet potato varieties in Nigeria, and currently about 6 vitamin A, provitamin A cassava varieties. So we work with all these foods, so all these crops by adding value to the crops and ensuring that people have access to nutritious food. For us at Cattle Foods, it is important that nutritious food has to be available, it has to be accessible, and it must be affordable. And because of these 3 pillars, we try to ensure that we reach out to people at the bottom of the pyramid, the vulnerable groups who are suffering from the scourge and effects of malnutrition in Nigeria. Statistics have shown that the rate of malnutrition in Africa is very high, and Nigeria is not exempted. In Nigeria today, we have about 33% of children below the age of 5 who suffer from vitamin A deficiency. So for us, it is important that, that food consumption has to be on the platform of nutrition. As one of our boss in Harvest Plus likes to say, that food is not food if it is not nutritious. And Cattle Food believes that food that is getting to people must be a food that can well nourish the body. How did it start? A few years ago, we came across Harvest Plus and what they are doing. We saw Harvest Plus working through research and innovation and trying to ensure that the staple foods become more nutrient dense. And for us at Cattle Food, this was a point of alignment for us. We know that Harvest Plus is a not-for-profit organization, but we as a private sector had to engage with Harvest Plus. We participated in their partners meeting. Harvest Plus works with more than 400 partners. We participated in their partners meeting. And since 2012, we have been pushing to ensure that people have access to nutritious food. And one of the things that Harvest Plus has done is to support us, give us technical support us to scale, to grow our business. We took the innovation from them and we decided to commercialize it. One of the things we did was to first test the innovation to ensure that it is something that can really make impact. And when we saw that it's something that can make impact, then we saw the business opportunity in it. Let me state here that, for instance, in 2019, we were just only able to meet up with less than 20%, less than 15% of the demand that we received for biofortified foods. And that was just for one of our products, which was a flagship product. That is the cassava-based custard, which we try to, it is a food, is a porridge in Nigeria that people consume, which is good for all age groups and very rich in vitamin A. So in 2019, we have about 750 tons of product that was demanded. And we're just only able to meet about 15% of this. That is to show you the commercial opportunity, the business opportunity in biofortified crop, our food. And the progress has been so interesting because through the support that we have received from Harvest Plus, we have also received interest from other organizations that are also willing to support us to scale to reach millions of Nigerians with nutritious food, like To Scale organization that is also trying to work with Cattle Food to ensure that more nutritious biofortified food is able to reach millions of Nigerians. Now, for us at Cattle Foods, we We like to tell people that it is not wrong to be afraid to do something, but just do it afraid. Just start. Just give your best and do it, and just do it somehow. Just start it. And it will interest you to know that Cattle Food is run by a group of young people. I think the age range in Cattle Food is just between 22 and 40. So it's young people that have seen the scourge or the effects of malnutrition from the past, the effect of decisions that were taken on the malnutrition, on the nutrition and food security system, and decided to also take advantage of the opportunity that biofortified food has presented. What can be done better? One of the things that can be done better is that the government needs to provide an enabling environment. It is important that regulatory bodies try to come up with a template that can make the certification of biofortified food, the time required for certifying biofortified food. It is important that regulatory bodies come up with a template that can shorten this time frame. It doesn't make all the economic sense and even impact sense if you have an innovation that can scale and cause impact in people's life, and the timing to certify this takes forever. So it is important that governments create an enabling environment. Investors and donors should also come up with capital. Scaling biofortified food is capital intensive, because one of the things we have challenges with there is the rate of adoption. You have to try to convince people that you are not trying to change the food culture of people. You are only coming to add value, to add more value to it. So we say we are adding value to tradition. So it is important that also capital funding should be made available so that awareness creation can scale up and more people can be reached with more nutritious food. Nutritious food has to be available, accessible, and affordable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pelumi, for those very insightful thoughts. Unfortunately, we are running very late on our time. I had another round of questions for our panel, but I will ask the question and ask you to please post the answer in the chat. The question is, how healthy is your business now? And what would you say to critics that say that many of the businesses in this sector are grantpreneurs and are actually crowding out others rather than crowding? What would you say to that critique? That's one. And lastly is to really thank the eminent panel that we've had, and ask the team that has been listening in to give them a big round of applause for sharing their experiences, taking their time and leap of faith to talk to us about the journey so far, but most importantly for being the pioneers in this blue ocean. I guess there's a lot that we have learned, and at this moment I would like to hand over to Abdul, MD AflaSafe Tech Transfer, to walk us through the remaining sessions for the breakaways. Thank you very much, and over to you, Abdul.
Thank you, Aggie. Thank you very much for this lively, session. And I think we are running out of time, but there are a lot of things that we've heard so far. And I'm sure that even though we are late, we'll try to get more information in the breakout session. I would like to thank also the panelists. And now, during the registration, and you select some groups. We have three groups here, one on AflaSafe, one on emetic storage solution, and another one on biofortified food. So I think the platform, the manager of platform will go into breakout session based on the group you belong to. And we will have, each group has a facilitator and a rapporteur. So you will move directly into the group, and the facilitator will lead you through what we are going to discuss. I think there are some questions that we have there. You can ask questions, but the facilitator will make sure that we discuss two major questions. And I think the main topic is challenge and opportunities in commercializing these innovations. And one question is about the gaps. What are the gaps that we identified? And I think we need to look at it and come up with some maximum 5 bullets on that. And the second one is, how can you accelerate the commercialization of this innovation? Of course, I think Aggie asked a very important question. I think the company didn't have the opportunity to elaborate about the journey to break even, and how do they see the horizon? Where are they in this journey for all this innovation? And probably this is going to be the opportunity to elaborate on that and how the environment and the kind of challenge that you mentioned, how these are affecting your break-even point. Those who have break-even already based on their original plan, how this happened, and you can inform the discussion. So thank you all, and we'll move into the breakout session. And when we come back, it's going to be for the rapporteur, the leader of each group, to take 3 minutes to give us the outcome of the discussion, the 5 bullets for the gaps and the 5 bullets for the ideas to accelerate the commercialization. Thank you all, and let's meet in 35 minutes. Thanks. Welcome back to the plenary. I hope you had a great conversation. I know the time is short, but I hope you've been able to capture some key insight about the gaps. And we are lucky to have the real actors in the room and to provide their insights. So I would like to give the floor to the different group, and probably the facilitator to give us their findings. And I think let's be very safe, 5 bullet maximum for the gaps that were identified, and 5 bullet maximum for the way forward, and the ideas to accelerate some kind of intervention that we need to put in place to accelerate the commercialization of this innovation. Of course, a lot will come tomorrow. So I would like to start with the hermetic storage technologies, and with Dr. Tairu Abdullahi.
Okay, Abdu, I don't know how did you choose this one. We're supposed to be grouped room 3, and you decided that room 3 goes first. Okay. Abdu, are you there?
I'm here. Please go ahead.
Oh, good. I just want to make sure you can hear me. Okay. In our group, actually, we had some discussion and we came up with some bullet points that I will enumerate for you. But mainly, we flip the coin. So we talk more about opportunities and then you can define them as a gap. It depends on how you look at them. So one of the first point that we mentioned is the need to have a really well-coordinated strategy for scaling in each country that will involve the different key actors, and mainly 3 of those actors: the implementing partner, the commercialization partner, and also the role of the government in that particular place or country to have the right strategy for scaling. The second point that was mentioned in our group is actually most of the other 3 points that I will mention, they are related all to the market size. One is the fact that there are things or projects or programs that are giving free bags to farmers. And because they are doing that, they are really shrinking the market. And that is not very encouraging for private sector to come in and invest for scaling. Another related to the shrinking market is the lack of well-defined standards that leads to the having of fake bags in the country. That also shrinks the market and is not encouraging for private sector investment. Another point that mentioned related to the market, last one, is the thinking of economies of scale. In some countries, the market is really too small to require big investment or encouraging investment from the private sector in order to get to a large scaling. So we should think about the regional markets in some of these cases. Another point that our group discussed a lot is point about access to raw material, then we decide to make it much bigger. It's not just raw material, it's really the question of how to make production more efficient in order to reduce the cost of production, leading probably to lower prices of the product on the market. That will help with the scaling. And last point that I capture is the whole issue of innovation and research, to continue the innovation and the research so that there is more innovation in terms of the product, but also more in terms of understanding the product themselves and the market and the customers. That will help in defining a very well coordinated strategy for scaling. These are the points I have captured, Abdu, and there are some people from our group, and Abigail and Madame Adetona were the rapporteurs. So if they want to add, please allow them maybe 1 minute to say if I missed something. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Abdullah. So we give 1 minute to Abigail, and I forgot the name, the second rapporteur, to provide any additional input. 1 minute each, if any. So it looks like you are fine.
So they can go.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Tyru, for this input. And we'll move to the second group. Alejandro, the floor is yours for your feedback.
Yes, Abdul. So I'll let Njeri to give the main comments as she being the reporter for the group. Thank you.
Okay, so Njeri, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. So the questions that came up, the first one was, what are the gaps in the commercialization approach that the companies that are manufacturing and distributing AflaSafe have faced? And these were largely classified into 3 broad areas: awareness, incentives, and the regulatory arena and partnerships. And what was tackled next is, having identified these as the problem areas, what is it that can be done to fill these gaps so as to accelerate the commercialization process? How do we close these gaps? The areas identified were a continuous sensitization program, but of course with the recognition that this is a very expensive undertaking, which is an uphill climb for the private sector standing on its own. The regulatory arena, which was also a big gap, is because there are currently no enforcements on the sale and consumption of aflatoxin contaminated grains and food. The other way to close this gap is through testing, by making it compulsory for the aggregators to test before they aggregate. And a parallel was drawn between this and the COVID tests that are now compulsory for people to board, to travel, to cross boundaries, which means that it can be done, and it should be the same for aggregating the food that we eat. But in the absence of a testing policy, this is not enforced. The partnerships then become critical, because these will bring together the uptakers, the private sector, the processors, the poultry farmers, and the millers. But currently there's no coordinated program across all of these actors to ensure aflatoxin safety. And indeed, a parallel was drawn on the government also not playing its part to ensure food safety, because by aggregating food in the silos, there's really no regulation that requires that this food first be tested upon going into the silos and be tested again when it is being released from the silos for public consumption. The question then was, how can we make aflatoxin a policy issue? And in the case of Nigeria, it was about a food safety bill that has been prepared, but the process has not been concluded. It will need to get passed, assented to by the president, which will also ensure that everybody is aware of it. And this policy will then be given teeth by a law that sanctions those who break it. Three major partners were also identified in the commercialization process that must work together. And the first one is the implementer or innovator. The second partner is a commercial partner that's doing the distribution. And of course, the third one is the national government that designs the route, the law, the communication, and the implementing laws that will ensure that there's aflatoxin safety. The commercial partner may be able to do the awareness raising and the demo, but aflatoxin safety and indeed food safety in general will only really work when these three sets of partners stand together, which will also ensure that sustainability is achieved. I'll stop there because that's what I managed to capture. Unless Alejandro, there may be something that I missed in the notes.
Okay, thank you, Njeri. Quick one, Alejandro, do you want to add something before we move to the next group?
No, not from my side. Everything was
okay. Thank you for the group, the group on AflaSafe for your input. Let's move to the biofortified food with Liz. Hello, Liz, are you there? Do you have any other member of the group? Oh, okay. You say you cannot unmute. Could you please unmute? Yeah, I think it's okay.
Yeah, she can go ahead now.
Thank you. Okay, so we had, so I've just tried to summarize the discussions we had in our group. The gaps that we discussed and put as the areas that need our attention are around production, processing, quality, and adulteration of crops and products being one of the issues that our commercial partners face. The second one is on standards, issues on nutrition guidelines and making sure that standardization of seeds is done well and nutrition guidelines are put in place. The other gap we talked about was not having the private sector and small and medium enterprises linked to financing and having ways of de-risking commercialization. The fourth area was not having enabling policies for biofortified crops and products. And the fifth area is on the lack of training, capacity building, sensitization, and advocacy. So in order to fill these gaps, we talked about working with the private sector from the research point. The second one is encouraging enabling policies, just like our colleagues working on AflaSafe, enabling policies for biofortified crops and products, and an enabling market environment, sort of taking advantage of things like ACTEFA and selling biofortified crops and products across countries on the continent and even outside the continent, and the government acknowledging these technologies as nutritious technologies that can be used. The third area is improving access to production, improving access to seeds, and also improving access to the infrastructure so that the our commercial partners can be able to access the products and buy the products easily. The fourth area was we discussed enabling smallholder farmers and especially female farmers who are primary caregivers to grow and produce biofortified crops and be part of the commercialization process. That's it from me, unless others want to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz, for this input. I think really interesting. As I can see, there are a lot of similarity between the group on AflaSafe and the biofortified crop. I think very interesting. We have a lot of stuff, and the issue about enabling environment. I think we have to push it a little bit further and to be more specific for this kind of challenge that we are mentioning. And I'm sure from the private sector session we had, Perumi was very clear. The issue about even the registration and from the regulator, and to give the time to get product registered, even in terms on their brand, the label, and all those kind of things. I think these are some of the issues that we need to package. I think they come very well. We need to see how we can articulate that. I think these are some of the questions that we'll push back tomorrow on creating an enabling environment to really facilitate the commercialization of these innovations. And we're going to interact with the leadership of some organization involved in the standard enforcement of the regulation to see exactly what are they doing, what are some of the examples, and in their engagement with the kind of the community to move this forward, the kind of incentivization, some example that some of the participants mentioned today. We're going to look at that and try to see how we can engage all other stakeholders to create this enabling environment. And I would like to stop here and to thank you all for your participation. And we received a lot of input. And I just want to remind you that this is a interconnected session. Tomorrow we'll look at the enabling environment, and the last day we are focusing on the future to think about that. Just keep tuned, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow and Thursday. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.